Okay, g'day everyone. Welcome to the Mentone RSL tonight. It's absolutely fantastic to see you here. I'm Ben Hurl, Director of Victorian UFO Action, and it gives us great pleasure to present these events for people in Melbourne. And it's really important that people come along and support this type of presentation, because there's just not much of this out there. And in Victoria, it has gone by the wayside over the years. So every person who's sitting in here tonight is really appreciated by us to come along and hear about what is one of Australia's most interesting cases that have occurred. And while it occurred a fair while ago, it's just still relevant today, because entities from other places are still appearing here today. They still come and interact with us for their own purposes, from their own places. And there's probably people in the audience tonight who may have had those experiences, and there's probably other people here who are just curious. And the Hair of the Alien case is complex. It represents one of the few cases in the world where there has been some type of physical evidence left behind. How often do we see UFO reports and you know, these fantastic tales, and there's really no evidence per se? This case, we see actual evidence left behind. And tonight we have the man who it occurred to, Peter Khoury. And we also have the man who investigated the case, Bill Chalker. So it really is wonderful that they've come down here tonight, and we are fully appreciative of their time. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you across to Joy Bock, who's a VUFOA team member. And Joy is going to be the MC for tonight. Just before I go, the event is being filmed tonight, and it's being filmed professionally, and it will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel as well. So, but there's nothing like being here to hear it firsthand. So you guys are in the box seat there. So I'm now going to pass you across to Joy.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone. Yes, hello and welcome. I think it's going to be a very intriguing night. I'm really excited, and I hope you all are as well. So, and also during the break, there's some books for sale as well. There's some books by Barry Watts and also by Bill Chalker. And I believe one of Bill Chalker's books, there's only 6 copies. So I think that's a draft of Hair of the Alien. So if you wanted to have a look at that, yeah, it will be down there. And Bill will be able to autograph the books as well. So after that break, we'll have 3 more breaks. They're only 5 minutes each, so it's just short enough to go for a toilet break. And there'll be enough time for Q&A. And we only have a short time for Q&A in between the speakers, but at the end we'll have 25 minutes for more Q&A, and if we have time we can open it up to the floor for anyone who would like to share any personal experiences that they've gone through themselves. Yeah, would be really interested. And all right, so without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Peter Khoury. Peter Khoury grew up in Lebanon in a Christian Maronite family, migrating with them to Australia at the age of 10. Married with 2 children, Peter worked for many years in the building industry and for a time ran his own cement rendering business. He now works in commercial security. In the wake of 1988 alien abduction experience, he established the UFO Experience Support Association and cooperated in numerous UFO investigations. His 1992 experience and the biological sample connected with it was the subject of the book by Bill Chalker, Hair of the Alien. He has also appeared in many TV programs and documentaries and has frequently lectured about his experiences. He has also organised a number of UFO conferences. So it is my pleasure to introduce Peter Khoury.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just for history and accuracy, I was 7 years old when we migrated out here. So there was a 3-year description, but I think probably a typo. But I did grow up in Lebanon, my first 7 years, and we lived in a coastal town that was close to, next door to an ancient Phoenician port, which is in Anfield, which is where my mum comes from. And my mum and dad lived in suburbs right next to each other. So I grew up in a Maronite Christian family, not very religious, you know. We didn't go to church every Sunday and so on, but we never ever discussed the UFO topic. My interest, basically, I had my first sighting at 7 years old in Lebanon, but it never registered with me. It was just an experience that I had and I always remembered. It wasn't until some years later, I was about 23, when I realised what I was experiencing were UFO experiences and abduction experiences, and it came as a shock to me to realise that there were millions of people around the world experiencing what I experienced, which at first I had nothing to label it. I didn't have a pigeonhole to put it in and give it a label. So my first experience was we're a bunch of kids playing in the street. In Lebanon you get 3 months of summer and it's school holidays, the whole 3 months. So we had a lot of time on our hands. We were 7, 8 kids, my cousins and myself and a couple of neighbours playing. Someone called out, let's go play on the roof. Roofs are different on the coast in Lebanon. They don't have tiles. Tile roofs is here, they're all flat. So everybody started running towards the roof, and someone called out, last one there is in Arabic, of course. But I had my little cousin, she was about a year and a half younger than me, and she was running last. So I let her get in front of me, and I was the last one there. And actually, yeah, that's me at 7 years old. Well, actually, the nose has been broken about 3 times. So, yeah, I let her run in front of me, and as we ran up the stairs, this place, we have cubby houses on top of every home has a cubby house, and they have vine leaves growing, and it's a real nice setting, and it's not like dangerous. You would think, oh, there's kids playing on the roof, they could fall over. It wasn't that way. So we ran up, and as we got to the top landing, I noticed that a number of them went through a door which had a steel frame, and it was a heavy door, so usually it would slam on its own weight. So as you'd run through, normally, every time someone would run through, you'd have to push it open, have your arms out in front of you to actually stop this door from knocking you out. And I realised that 4 or 5 or 6 of them had gone through, and this door stayed open as if there was some force holding it open. But I mean, I wasn't thinking about that then. I was just waiting for this door to come back and hit me. And as I stepped onto the roof, I noticed that they probably took 2 or 3 steps onto this roof, and everybody was just frozen like mannequins. And I thought, oh, this is a game we're playing and I'm in. So I walked up to them and I started to tickle them, trying to get a reaction. I wanted to see them smile. I wanted to see the crow's feet on their eyes. I wanted to see some movement. And they were just dead still, no movement, not even breathing. They were just statues. And I walked up to a taller kid. His name was George, and he was about probably 2 years older than us and much taller. And I walked up to him and I went to tickle him under the throat. And as I did that, I noticed, I looked up and I tickled him, and as I looked up, about 20 metres above us, I noticed an X-shaped object. And when I say an X-shaped object, it had no propellers, no landing, nothing. Just an X-shaped with a tinted window that was darkly tinted. It was probably like a TV screen, but I could see there were 2 figures in there, and they were very, very slim, very, very tall, and all I could see was a silhouette. I couldn't see features, eyes, face, anything, but I could tell that their heads were turned and they were looking directly down towards our direction. And all of a sudden, within a split second, we're all down at the bottom landing on the bottom of the steps, and there was 3 or 4 of them sitting down, and the rest of us are standing up. And as young kids, like, we're stunned. I was looking at people's faces and I could see that they were confused. We didn't know how we got down from the roof so quick. And while we're sitting there looking at each other dumbfounded, we hear our parents calling out to us. And we respond, you know, we're here, and they come in and they're like, where have you been? And we're like, oh, we're up on the roof. And it was like, smack. Where have you been? We're like, up on the roof. And every time we said we were up on the roof, someone got a smack. And we didn't understand why. But then they said to us, look, we've been looking for you for almost 3 hours. If you were up on the roof, you would have responded. You would have heard us call out to you. We didn't know what to say. So where were you? Up on the roof. Bang. Okay, let's go. Go home. Everyone went home. We were grounded for a few days. Couldn't play with each other or anything. And that's similar to what I saw. That's a concept car by a Toyota. It appeared at a motor show. I'd say my son would have been about 5 years old when I took him. So maybe 16 years ago or something, it appeared at a motor show. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, wow, that's the closest thing that I've seen that resembled what I saw that day, except for the tinted windows, obviously. So I have an experience that didn't fit into anything we believed in. You know, being brought up in Lebanon and in a Christian Maronite family, my brothers, no one talked about this. Now, the first thing that I saw that I learnt about UFOs was, some of you here, probably my age, you remember this. There was a British show called UFO. I don't know if you recall, and the main actor used to drive a really nice sporty car. It might have been a McLaren or a Lamborghini, I'm not sure, with winged doors. And they used hubcaps for their special effects. And what impressed me more than the UFO hubcaps was the car. I was like blown away by this car. But that was my exposure to UFOs. So after I had that experience, the first thing I could say that, I maybe saw a UFO, was watching it on TV and seeing this show called UFO. So we migrate back out. My dad had lived in Australia 10 years before we migrated out here, so we migrated out here. For a few years, everything was normal, you know, getting to know a new country. As a young kid, you fit in, you assimilate a lot quicker than your parents or older siblings. I fitted in well, learnt the language quickly. I'm the only one in my family that doesn't have an accent, or do I? I'm not sure. Yeah, so I left the family home when I was about 18 for about 5 years, lived on my own, and did run around with a bad crowd. I've never said I've always been an angel, but I did run around with a wrong crowd, got mixed up in a few things. But one day in 1988, my high school sweetheart and I got back together, and we thought, let's give it a go. And there was a chance that we could, think about marriage and so on. So one day we're sitting in the car and we're talking about our upcoming trip to Queensland. And as we're sitting in the car, she's in the passenger seat, I'm in the driver's seat. I had my back to the door, she's facing me, and we're talking. And I just leant out the window. I don't know if something I get these feelings and something says, take a look, and I do take a look, and I usually see something. But I stuck my head out the window and I could see grape-sized ball of light, bright white. And it was heading from north to south and rapidly moving. All of a sudden, I'm talking to Vivian, I said to her, come have a look at this. So we got out of the car and we were both watching this thing, and it was moving pretty rapidly, and then it got to a point, I believe it was the Southern Cross, and it got to a point where there was a triangular shaped stars, 3 of them. And when it reached the top star, point A is where it stopped, and it was moving very, very rapidly, and all of a sudden it just stopped on a dime, like, I don't know how it stopped so quick, but it stopped there, and it hovered for probably about 5 seconds, and then it shot a beam of light to point B, but you could see it at 2 places at once. It was like, it reminded me of a dumbbell or, you know, training weights. And then it disappeared from point A, and you could still see it at point B. Then it would shoot the beam of light to point C, and you could see it at two places at once. Then it would shoot to another point, and it did this probably 3 times in a pattern, and then it just went erratic. It was just bang, bang, bang. It was just all over the place, but always in a triangular formation, going back and forth. And it did this for probably, I'd say, almost 2 minutes. We watched it do that, and we were amazed. And then what we did, I got a bit of cardboard out of my car, and we sort of made a tube out of it and just tunneled my vision. And Vivian's comment at the time was, "It looks like a war with the stars." And I said to her, "No, it looks like it's looking for something," because I assumed that the light was like a search beam. I wasn't thinking that it's appearing at 2 places, could be using it as like a hyper jump type thing. I didn't know much about the subject at the time, so I wasn't an expert or anything, probably still not, still aren't. But so yeah, we watched it for a couple of minutes, and it sort of blew us away, because we're watching it and I'm thinking there must be hundreds and thousands of people in Sydney who are watching this. You could not miss it. It wasn't something that, you know, you could sort of blink and miss it. This was in your face. Someone had to have seen it. I checked newspaper reports, radio, didn't hear anything. So I don't know if people don't look up at the sky as often as I do. I don't know. It's just there was no explanation for it that no one else saw it. 6 months after that experience, which was February 1988, this is in July, this changed my life. The sketches you see there don't say too much, but what's coming up next will give you a clearer picture. I had moved back home, was getting ready to get married, and I thought, yep, go back home, you know, do the right thing and move in. And I always had my own space, so I'm watching TV with my dad in the lounge room, and then my brother, who was asleep in the bedroom, in my bedroom, walked out and came into the lounge room and said to me, go watch TV in your room, I want to sleep out here. To me it didn't make sense, but I thought, oh okay, you know, I need my privacy, not a problem. I walked into my room and I sat on the bed. I had a little Toshiba coloured TV. I turned it on. I put my hands behind my head and crossed my legs over to lie back on the bed. And as I went to lie back, my legs hit the bed before my hands hit the pillow. And instantly, I felt something grab me around my ankle. And because my legs were crossed, I felt something grab me around the ankle. To me, it was like the index finger and the thumb, that part of the hand. But it could have been a device, because as soon as that grabbed me, I just felt pins and needles clawing all the way up through my body. And as it got to the top of my scalp, it was like static electricity running through my hair. And I became paralysed. I couldn't move. Now, I got a martial arts background. I've done kickboxing. I was very, very fit, played rugby league when I was a kid. Rugby league is a bit better than AFL, but sorry. In Sydney it is anyway, in Sydney. But yeah, so, you know, I was a fit guy. I could handle myself. And I became paralysed and I couldn't move. And to me, I'm claustrophobic, and as I get older, it probably gets a bit worse now, and I think I put it down to these experiences that I have. Being someone who, you know, trains and fights and does things, I don't like to be restricted, especially if you're in a fight situation and you get restrained or you get, you know, put to sleep. It's not a good thing. But yeah, I just couldn't move any part of my body except for my eyes, which were open. And I'd say if my eyes were closed, I would have thought it was a dream, and I would have just let it go at that, you know, and moved on. But my eyes were open, and I could see at the foot of the bed this creature. And not thinking alien at this stage, don't care about aliens, don't care about UFOs. But I look at this and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is the devil, this is evil. Pretty horrific looking. Like, this is from the movie Communion, and if an artist came to me and said, we want to do a documentary about your case, give us a description of what the creatures look like, I couldn't have done a better job, but that is exactly what they look like. I couldn't have done a better job to give a description like that. Whitley Strieber did but I suppose he had a big crew working with him, and they can, you know, with research in other cases and that, you can build what they would look like better than I could. But that is perfect, and they do look horrific. I don't care if they're friendly, I don't care what they are, military, whether they're scientists, I don't know, but they were very robust and very, very frightening to look at. So I'm looking at one at the foot of the bed, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? And then they're at my right side of the bed, on my right. And like, these guys are touching me. I can feel them against my arm. And I was stressed, and I'm thinking to myself, because I was paralysed, I couldn't move. I was thinking to myself, still wasn't thinking alien. I was thinking, this is evil, this is a devil. And I'm thinking, you're not going to walk any, you're going to die. And if you come out of this, the best scenario for you, you're in a wheelchair. Your parents will walk in the morning and you won't be able to move. You're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. That was my way of thinking. It was nothing to do with aliens or UFOs. As I'm looking at these guys, I'm not going to be shy to say this, I was petrified. I was pretty scared, and I was thinking, how am I going to deal with, what am I going to do? I can't move, I can't fight, I can't run, I can't do anything. And then all of a sudden, I'm terrified. And all of a sudden, with the corner of my eye, I look over to the left side of the bed, and I see two of these guys. I shouldn't say guys, because one was a female. The one to the right, the one without a mask, that's supposed to resemble a surgical mask on the mouth. And the female, the guy closest to me, had a surgical mask, not like our doctors. I mean, our doctors' masks are probably the width of my hand, or our surgical masks. These were probably wide as 2 fingers, and I assume because they have a smaller mouth than us. But the male had it sitting under his chin. He wasn't wearing it over his mouth. The female, who was a little bit further from me, she had it on her. She was wearing it on her mouth, and I could tell she was a female because you could see breasts, but they were in like a jumpsuit, which was the same colour. They blended in, their face, the whole body was that colour. 1 second I'm petrified, and the next I'm totally calm. And I mean so relaxed, it's not funny. And looking into big eyes like that, it's like you fall in a black void or something. And I don't know if I was hypnotised or they just calmed me down, but in a split second I just felt so relaxed. And then telepathically in my mind, this isn't voices, I wasn't hearing voices, I wasn't going crazy and hearing things screaming at me, but it was a knowing, it was more a feeling. It wasn't voices, it was just this knowing. And the male said to me, looking straight into my eyes, and said to me, relax, calm down, we're not going to harm you, it'll be like the last time, relax, calm down. And of course, what do I think to myself? What effing last time? Like, I don't have a memory of a last time of this happening, but it was like, relax, like the last time, and so on. And I became really, really relaxed. It spun me out at how relaxed I was. And later on, years later on, Professor John Mack came out and he actually put me through a hypnotherapy session. And what he found really interesting was, when I was describing the first beings I described to you, I was sweating, I was shaking, and as soon as he got me to describe these guys, I became totally calm. And the sweat went, and he actually made a comment, you can't fake that, you can't fake that sweating, just stop it instantly. Like, it's hard to explain, but anyway, this is me on the bed, and that's how they surrounded the bed. When someone's telling you, relax, calm down, we're not going to harm you, everything will be okay, and then you see something like that in his hand, and that's an actual syringe. This is someone from Melbourne actually did that painting and sent it to me, resembling my experience. He wasn't that muscly. I don't think they use steroids, but anyway. What he was holding in his hand looked like a syringe, but it had like an optic fibre. It was like an optic fibre cable with a light at the tip of it. And as he's saying to me, calm down, relax, we won't harm you, he leans over me and holding it almost like that, points it to this side of my head, bang, I'm out, lights out, I don't remember anything anymore. I jump out of bed, what I thought was about 10-15 minutes later. I sprung, because I had been fighting this paralysis for so long, as soon as I could move, I just sprung out of bed, walked straight into the TV. Now, what I forgot to tell you was, while all this is happening, I'm trying to call out to my brother and my dad who were in the room next door. I could think about what I wanted to say, I could think about their names, but my voice box, I just couldn't say anything. I couldn't scream, I couldn't call out their names, couldn't do anything. So anyway, I jump out of bed, I walk into the TV room, and I try to wake up my dad. And it still concerns me to this day, because I don't know what, you know, I thought he died. I thought he actually had a heart attack or something, because I couldn't wake him up, and I was shaking him, and I actually slapped him a couple of times. I couldn't wake him up. And then I turned around to wake up my brother, and he was in the same state. I couldn't wake him up either. So I shook him and then slapped him 3 times really hard. And he woke up startled, and he said in Arabic, I feel like I've been switched off. He didn't register with me at the time, didn't know anything about this, you know, never researched these cases, didn't know how people around abductees are controlled, or, you know. So I asked him, I said, how long has it been since I went to my room? And he says, oh, about 10-15 minutes. I said, okay, and I can't wake up my dad, can you give us a hand, wake up Dad? So we shook him for a while. Dad woke up, oblivious to it all, didn't say anything. So I went and grabbed a glass of water, grabbed it, walked into my room, put the glass of water next to the bedside chest, and I thought, if I get up in the morning and that glass of water is there, this thing must have really happened. That was my way, you know. Anyway, in the morning I get up, have a shower. As I'm drying off, on my right chin, I have this mark, but it was actually red raw. It was as if you put a cigarette there and let it burn for a minute. It was red raw, it was inflamed. It was a little bit sore, not so much, I wouldn't say very painful, but it was irritating me. And probably when I rubbed the towel over it too, that didn't help. But it was red raw. Now, 6 hours later, I went to pick up my fiancée, who was ended up being my wife, but at the time I was my fiancée. But went to pick her up from work, and as soon as she got in the car, she said to me, oh my God, who have you had a fight with? And I said, no one, but I had an experience that I need to talk to you about. So as I started to talk to her, I've gone like that, and there was dry blood on under my fingernail. So she had a look and she said, oh my God, you got it's like a donut, it's inflamed, there's a hole, there's blood there. And I said, oh, and you should see this mark. And I lifted my jean leg up to show her, and that's exactly how it was. Healed in 6 hours. It was as you see it there. It's still a scar, it's very deep, but in 6 hours, it was completely healed. You couldn't even tell, you know, there was no rash, no redness, nothing. There's 3 different scoop marks on my leg. I think you can see them. I'm having difficulty with the light there to pick it out, but there's one on the inside of my knee, and then 2 down on the shin. This one here is mine, and then the others are other people that have been through the support group. One or two of them are from a book from Bud Hopkins. So people are reporting this. It's happening to them. There's physical scarring on people. Now, my fiancée and I had talked about this. I told her my story. She'd never heard anything like it. One day we're driving, I'm driving to work, we're driving, we see a bus shelter, and there was an advertisement in the bus shelter, and it was a huge poster, and it said, they're coming. It was a black poster, and it just had writing across it, they're coming. 2 weeks later, same poster, except they're here, in white writing, they're here. And it caught your attention, like you think, what is it, what's here? And I still hadn't related it to any of this. 2 weeks after that, so this was over a 6-week period. 2 weeks after that, bang, that image you saw before of the big gold face with the big eyes, that's what you saw on the poster in the bus shelters. And we were blown away. So 2 days later, I believe, I was driving, doing a job, and I'm driving and I hear a radio interview with Brian Bury and Whitley Strieber. As I'm driving, I'm hearing this guy talk, and he's talking about these beings that I just described to you. And I'm thinking, no, it can't be. No one else can have seen this, not possible. And as I sat there, I pulled up in a car park, and I sat in the car park for like 25 minutes listening to this interview. And the more Whitley Strieber talked about his experience, the more I kept thinking, nah, it's not the same. There were a lot of differences, but there were some things that, like the beings themselves, the way they looked, certain things, I was ticking boxes and I was crossing some out, I'm crossing a lot out. But then I thought, I better get this book. So that's the book there, and that's my fiance at the time, covering her face because she's too shy to show that she was reading the book. But anyway, she'd read this book, and every day she'd get to work, she'd ring me up and she'd say to me, you have spoken to this one about, told your story to someone, and they've written a book about it. She goes, there is no way this is your story. And I hadn't read that book yet. So when the time came for me to read the book, I found it really, really difficult. I'd turn a page and I'd struggle to finish half a page. It was torture for me. And it took me a few months before I decided I'm going to do this, and I ended up reading it from cover to cover. Okay. Due to all that, I became a bit obsessed. Any book I could scour, any bookshop, any book. And by the way, if you're in Sydney, go to Gould's bookshop. He's got some second-hand books, UFO books there you might like. It's a 3-story place, really, really good bookshop. But anyway, I started collecting books and just reading whatever I could. And then I started to realise, oh my God, these things are really happening to other people. I'm not crazy, they're not crazy. And I went on a search, and I contacted a number of professionals, starting off with psychologists, counsellors, psychologists, you name it. I just tried everyone in the medical profession. Yeah, they're listening to me because of course they want your money, but as soon as I'd say to them, look, I think there was some entities in my room and there were creatures there, and you know, I've got marks from my body from it and that. Oh no, we don't deal with that, bang, hang up. I was lucky enough, there was a guy in Queensland, he was a therapist, and he said to me, he said, look, this sounds, I've heard this before, it sounds like to do with UFOs and that. Why don't you contact the UFO group? So doing research here, I found out that there was a group forming in Sydney, and I attended their first meeting, and I actually won the competition for naming the group, me and 2 female friends that were there with me. And it was going to be called UFO Research Sydney, but someone in the audience jumped up and said, no, it shouldn't be Sydney, it should be New South Wales. So I still won the prize, which was 3 books, but they changed it to UFO Research New South Wales, and I got involved with UFO Research New South Wales group. Over a period of time, I became to lose confidence in them. I don't want to badmouth anybody or anyone, so I'm just going to quickly brush through this. What I found was there were members in the group who thought that the abduction scenario was more a sexual fantasy or more women's time of the month, get some thinking like, and it really annoyed me for people to think like that. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to start my own group and I'm going to help people who have similar experiences to me. So there was a gentleman called Jamie Leonardo. Jamie and I got together. Bud Hopkins had come out for a conference. It was in King's Cross. We were fortunate enough to meet with Bud for a couple of hours, sat down, interviewed him. And one question I had for him was, do you think someone in my position who's had an experience, I don't understand the field much, I'm just starting to research it now, do you think I could be useful in a in starting a support group. And he said, I think you'd be more than useful because you can relate to people, more so relate to their experiences than others. So we founded the UFO Experience Support Association in 1993, in April 1993, by the way. That was the original committee. And we've got a physicist on there, we've got a hypnotherapist, we've got a hypnotherapist that used to work with the police, we've got a psychologist, and some really hard-working people who just like to, you know, get things done without having a title to their name. These are some of the meetings the UFO Experience Support Association put together. We were all about just educating. We weren't about the research side, investigating, yes, but more so educating the public, trying to get the word out there. So we were fortunate enough to have people like John Mack attend a workshop that we had in Bankstown, and the people that turned up to that were really, really impressed in how much time he gave them and how open-minded he was to the topic. I think you'll see in this one of the photos, Kelly Carl's there. The far bottom one, that's a lot of speakers from all around the world, basically Brazil, England. So we used to hold big conferences. I used to have my own business at the time, and I used to fund the conferences, and I didn't really care at the time if I didn't make all my money back. Where now I'm in the security industry, work hard. Money doesn't come as easy as it used to. So we got to really sort of budget when we do our meetings. And this is more of the group environment that we had in a lot of the meetings with Mary Rodwell, Frank Wilkes, Robert Froller, Jenny Randell, Valery Uvarov. So we've had a lot of quality speakers come in. We've had a lot of publicity also. What I find with the media, they're on board, they'll write it for 2 days, and they'll forget it. But as you see on TV, anytime somebody's making a report or commenting on the UFO topic, right at the end of it, they've got to have that little snicker or laugh. I've been invited on Rove McManus' show. I've been invited on the Project, and I've knocked them back. I've knocked a number of shows back simply because I've worked very, very hard to build my credibility and get to where I am. I don't need to go on a TV show for the sake of being on a TV show and then have, you know, Mark Hughes make fun of me because he just thinks it's great TV. So I pick and choose what I do. I don't rush into things. If someone, you know, wants documentaries now, I'm very, very cautious of what I deal with, who I deal with. This is a trip to Japan. In 1996, I was fortunate enough to get invited to go to Japan, and the reason I got invited to go there was the gentleman that invited me came to Australia. He originally wanted Bill to go, and Bill had some other commitments. His book, The Oz Files, was coming out and couldn't go, so he recommended me. The reason the guy wanted someone to go to Japan and talk about this, his wife, and he's pretty influential, very rich guy. He owns about 10 businesses, jewellery businesses and convention centres and so on. His wife is having experiences and he just wanted to understand. And I find that really admirable that, you know, he'd go to another country to get someone to help him understand what his wife's going through. But it was a good experience. I spoke. There was 3 days. It was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and a lot of people turned up, and they had these massive. If you can see in the top to the right, that advertisement I'm holding, that was all through the city of Kanagawa, and it actually says it's about the meeting, of course, and it says meet the man who met the sky people or the people from up there, because they don't have a word for alien or didn't at the time. There's a band now in Japan called Alien, and the lead singer, they interviewed him and they said, what's the name of your band? He could not pronounce it. And it's the name of his band. So that's how foreign the word alien is to them. Okay, this is leading to my 1992 experience. What really blew me away now, by this time, I'd already been researching the topic. I'd received hundreds of letters from all around the world and realised that this isn't just happening to me, this isn't just happening in Australia, this is happening everywhere, to different cultures, different religions, different professions, doesn't discriminate. What blew me away was that it happened at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd never heard of anybody having an experience during the day. It's always late at night, and my other experiences, or most of them, have been at night. But this happened in the morning. Now, I had received head injuries a few months before that, and I was attacked by 3 guys. I was almost killed. I actually got stabbed in the chest. I got hit on the head 3 times with a shovel, and I had a bottle broken on my arm. I didn't even throw a punch. I didn't intend to. I didn't want to. And it all happened from behind me anyway. I didn't even see it coming. So I got pretty badly injured. And so here I am at home a few months later, and I'm driving my wife to the station to get a train. And as I'm driving there, I had to pull up, I'd say 8 times, and get violently ill, just vomiting, but it was just liquid. It was just, I couldn't understand where it was coming from. On the way back home, the same story, get pulling over, getting sick. I get home, I go into bed. I jump into bed. It was July, so it was cold. I threw the quilt over me. I had a sloppy joe on. I had tracksuit pants on, and I was feeling ill, so I threw the quilt over me and I covered my head, just didn't want to see the world. And within a minute or two, I felt something sit on the bed. And to me, it felt like a dog or a cat jumped on the bed, but we didn't have any pets at the time. So it caught my attention. And as I sat up, as I sat bolt upright, I'm face to face. This is the first sketch I did, and then I got an artist to do some more artwork. Female was both. There were 2 females. One was one was Asian looking. She was sitting to the side of the bed. There's another picture. You'll see the position on the bed. Okay, that's the blonde. I sat up, and this female is straddling me, and she's completely naked. And as I sat up, it felt like my astral body, whatever you want to call it, my soul, it felt like it's something sat up before me, and I could see a transparent image of me, and then I could see her through that, and just couldn't register what was going on. And then all of a sudden, my physical body caught up with my astral body, and I became one again. And as soon as that happened, she cupped both hands, she cupped the back of my head and brought me towards her left breast. I put my hands against her and I pushed away. As I pushed away, she forced me towards her again, and I pushed her. Now, I'm claustrophobic at the best of time. And the 3rd time, she used super strength and pushed my face into her breast and buried my face into her breast, and I couldn't breathe. And being sick at that time and having freaking out at what's going on, my reaction was, I took a little nip. I just took a little, I wouldn't say it was a bite, I'd say it was just like a pinch almost. But I bit something, and instantly it went down the back of my throat. And as it hit the back of my throat, I started, it was the worst burning sensation. It was like drinking acid. And it really, really burned. It was uncomfortable. Now, that was the position on the bed. So the blonde is on top of me, the Asian is to the side. The thing about the Asian-looking female, her eyes were almost black. I could see a little bit of white, but not much. But she had a little belly, and I could see a belly button on her. But the blonde female, I didn't see a belly button. And that freaked me out at the time. Like, I was thinking, where's your belly button? That's what I was more concerned at looking at. Look, she was well proportioned. She was very attractive. You can see her face is thin but long, but it really suited her. She was a very, very attractive woman. Like, the only thing I could say is the skin was very fair. So I'd say she doesn't see the sun or spend any time in the sun at all. Milky white skin. Her hair was wispy, thin and wispy, but more It was more like a Farrah Fawcett type style hair, you know, Farrah Fawcett in Charlie's Angels with the wind blowing and her hair blowing. It was a bit exotic actually looking at it, and I was thinking, where's this wind coming from that's blowing her hair? But so I've swallowed this thing, and then I hear him communicating telepathically. And to me, it was like the Asian was observing and just almost recording what was going on. And the blonde looks over at her and says, he's done this wrong, something's gone wrong. It's not like the last time. And here's this not like the last time again that gets me thinking. And she's like, he's done this wrong, something's wrong. This isn't like the last time, something's gone wrong. And look, there's a few aspects to this. I haven't even spoken to Bill about it. I don't want to. I don't feel I have to tell every aspect of this story. There's some things that need to remain private, and they will. I don't know if there'll come a day where and look, when I went public with this, I didn't have children. And after having children, I realised that sometimes as a parent, you know, regardless of what you're trying to achieve, to tell the truth and keep things consistent, you do have to protect your kids as well. That's the position on the bed of the female. You can see there's an image, you can see my head towards her, closer to her breast, and then at the back of it is the back of the Asian female's head. It's almost like a side-on shot. What I swallowed, to me, felt like it could have been a bit of flesh, but then it could have been anything. But at the end of it all, I'll get into detail with the hair, but years later, we have Viagra and we have stuff like that. And now I think, is that what I swallowed? Because I'm trying to keep, I don't talk about, trust me guys, this is the first time I'm mentioning some of this stuff, because I just think I don't need to, but sometimes you have to. After all this, I'm sorry for the young people that are here, maybe you should block your ears, but I had an erection for 6 hours and it's not fun. It's not fun. It's very, very painful. And I think maybe that's what I swallowed. I'm not sure. Because I didn't see her bleed. I didn't see any cuts on her. I didn't see her flinch in pain. I don't know if I was given something or not. But anyway, I start coughing because my throat is burning and it's itchy. I'm coughing. I look down. I look back up. Bang, they're gone. No one in the room anymore. How much time have I got? Yeah? Okay. So just quickly, I'll wind it down and then we'll kick on later. I had the urge, I wanted to wash it down, so I went into the bathroom, I got some water, I got some Lebanese bread and think, eat the bread, drink, it'll wash it down. No good. Had the urge to go to the bathroom to pee. As I went, it was like my private part had been slashed with razors. It was really, really painful. And I had a look and I could see 2 hairs, and one was like an S shape almost, but embedded into my private part. And then another one was like half around and also embedded. When I say embedded, it's like you push your fingernail in and you get that mark. So when I peeled them off, you could see the mark. And if it wouldn't have been, you know, people look at it and think I would have taken a photo just for the record, just to show how embedded it was, but I don't want people seeing my private part, obviously. So, as I tried to take them off, I was in tears. It was that painful. I was in excruciating pain. But I took them off and I was crying. Took them off, I grabbed the bag, a plastic bag, put them in it, folded it over, went and got a paper, put it across, taped it over it and wrote exactly the date, the time, what happened, because I knew there was no way that those 2 pieces of hair could have been on me in any other way. No chance at all. Okay, that's a piece of the hair. You can see it. I'll just come out the front. That's a piece of the hair there. There were 2 pieces. This is after the testing was done, so they've cut some of the hair and used it, obviously, so we lost a little bit. But a lot of people ask me now, skeptics in particular, you don't have the hair anymore, do you? And I said, yes, I do. I still do. Bill had the hair, after testing the hair, Bill had it for 10 years, safekeeping. Last year, I actually asked him to have it back. My daughter asked for, she said to me, I want it in the family, you know, I might want to show it to my kids one day. So I got it home, I've got it at home now, and look, I had it from 92 till 96 before I got approached by Bill that there were biochemists who were willing to test it. Never had any government officials, anyone try to break into my house and take the hair, fortunately, I guess. It's back at my house now. Not going to tell you where. But I would love to have bought it and showed you, you know, you want something like that, I know people want to see, and I'd love to show it. But it's so rare that if it goes missing, I'd never forgive myself. So Bill Chalker contacts me, and he says to me out of the blue, just says, have you still got that hair sample? And I'm like, yeah. And it's funny how Bill found out about the hair. We had 2 producers at my house from Channel 7. They were going to do a documentary. And Bill was standing there, and one of the female producers says, you know what, Peter, if this was really happening, there should be evidence. There should be physical evidence, like a sex assault case or something. There's got to be some physical evidence. And I said, I'll show you evidence. And I went and got the hairs out of where I had them hidden, took them out, and Bill's ears pricked up straight away, and he was like, why haven't you told me about this? And I was like, Bill, my 88 experience is bad enough to open a can of worms like this. So he knew about it, kept it in the back of his mind, and then years later, it was around 96, wasn't it? Around, yeah, 98, I think, 98. So 6 years after I had the hair, I get a call, and he asked me the question. It was like, yep, let's do it. I knew that if I gave Bill the hair, it was going to be in good hands. I've seen other people receive samples, and this is no word of a lie, I've seen them look at the sample and go, nah, in the bin. Without testing it, without getting anyone to look at it. Someone just goes, oh no, I don't think this is it, and throws it in the bin. I think that is sacrilege. You don't do that. So when I gave the hair to Bill, I knew it was in good hands. Fortunately enough for me, I was lucky enough to retrieve a hair sample, 2 hair samples, and which, I mean, it's very rare in the UFO field for people to have evidence. It's somebody's story. It doesn't matter how remarkable the story sounds, it's just somebody's story. And we've got to take people for their word. And I feel for these people because some of them have a lot better experiences than what I've had, but unfortunately they haven't been able to get evidence to back it up. So when the hair came into play and Bill contacted me, I actually didn't hesitate for 1 second in handing the sample over, knowing that it'd be in good hands. And once the scientists biochemists got their hands on it, they decided that they'd come and collect hair samples from me, my wife, tested my wife's hair to compare it to this hair. It was nothing like it. Okay, you'll find that it is different than human hair in that it's transparent. It's almost see-through. It's like it's like a fishing line, a very thin fishing line. It's got a lot of differences to the human hair. Bill will go into detail with that. I'm going to try not to go too much into the DNA stuff. I'll leave that up to Bill. Okay, this is some of the results that they found. And what was interesting to me, when I went public with this, I wrote probably 35 letters to different professional people in the psych industry and so on, doctors, hypnotherapists. And luckily, we had 12 people that responded, and to get one would have been great. To get 12 was phenomenal. So we set up a meeting, and I had a panel of 12 people sitting down at a table with me sitting on a chair, and I was given the 3rd degree. I was asked every question under the sun. The thing that caught their attention was when I mentioned that she didn't have a belly button, the blonde female, I didn't see a belly button on her. Now, I'm talking this is 1992. We didn't know anything about cloning. I'm not into biochemistry. the only thing I've learned about DNA is through this case. So to get a result from what we did that actually correlated what I had told these people, and I did say I met there was a female that was blonde, you know, Nordic looking, Scandinavian, whatever, tall, blonde. There was the Asian. Now when they tested the hair, they found that the root of the hair, and luckily the hair actually had a root, and there were two pieces of hair. One of them had a root, one didn't. The scientists seemed to think that the hair was one piece and it was broken. I disagree, because when I first looked at the hairs, on that moment, one was darker, looked darker and thicker to me than the other. I mean, as I say, I'm not a biochemist, I could be wrong. They looked at it under microscopes, but looking at it with the naked eye, to me, the hair that didn't have the root to it looked a bit thicker. And they're trying to convince me that it was one hair, and I'm finding that hard to believe. But anyway, what they found was the root of the hair had rare Basque mitochondrial DNA, which is blonde Scandinavian looking. And the shaft of the hair had completely different DNA, which is the rarest on the planet, Chinese mitochondrial DNA. They use the term Mongoloid. We don't mean Mongoloid as in, I think it's the race rather than a genetic disorder. And it sort of kicked up their interest, obviously, and they did some nuclear testing and they found the CCR5 generation. I'll let Bill go into that. I don't want to... I can tell you, I just want to give Bill something to talk about and make it interesting. I don't want to cut half his talk. So that's more results from the DNA. Now, the person that conducted the DNA testing or oversaw it is an expert in his field. He's written a number of books, worked for CSIRO, has since gone public. And I'll tell you what, that guy trusted me and Bill for over 10 years to keep his identity secret, and we did that. And I could have easily named him a number of times just to benefit my case and boost my credibility. And I chose not to, because I am loyal to people who trust me. So I never said... I had people make comments to me that Bill Chalker did the DNA testing in his backyard shed on a piece of newspaper. And that really used to annoy me, because now that they know who the person is, they're all over this person. He's at meetings, he's a public speaker for him, he's this, he's that. But I just didn't want to give away his identity, and I kept it secret for that long. I'll get to something that he's appeared in and supported us recently when we get to it. Okay, that looks like Bill Chalker in his younger days. This is when Bill contacted me and said, you know, I got some biochemists, they're willing to do some work, are you interested? And similar to the lie detector thing, I've always harassed him, I want to do a lie detector polygraph test. So as soon as I got the question thrown at me, I was like, yeah mate, come and get it, let's do it, you know, no hesitation. I wasn't going to hold the hair and not have it tested and keep telling people, oh, this isn't hair of an alien or whatever. I wanted the test to back it up. Once we started doing the hair testing, everywhere I turned, I just saw hair and DNA. I don't know why. Okay. Professor John Mack visited Australia in 1996. May he rest in peace. He came out to do some research. He attended a workshop that we organised. And then he interviewed me, and he was pretty impressed with my story and credibility, and he appointed me the Australian representative for PEER, which is Program for Extraordinary Experience Research, based at Harvard. Whenever he was in Australia, I think he had 2 visits here, maybe 3, I'm not sure, but he would come and spend time with me and my family. He was like a father figure to me, John. And Dominique was like a sister to me. We were very close. And that picture, well, as you can see, we're at the Opera House. I work at the Opera House now. I shouldn't tell you that. No, I work in security, and I supervise at the Opera House, and I run large teams of security at events outside and inside. But so yeah, we've been sightseeing and so on. That photo down the bottom, this one to the left bottom here, that breaks my heart, that photo, because that's the last time I saw John alive. Took him to the airport, sat down with him for 2 hours, had to go to one of the psychologists in the group, had a barbecue, and she wanted John, she invited him to come, but we thought, oh, go to the airport. I get back to the barbecue, and John rings me and he says, have you left the airport yet? I'm like, yeah, what's going on? He's like, oh, our plane's been delayed 5 hours. So it honestly broke my heart that, and I said to him, I'll come and get you, and he was like, no, it's all right, don't worry about it. And now anytime I think of him or see that photo, I just think I could have spent another 5 hours with him, you know. But what you see there was one great man who did a lot for the field and gave us a lot of credibility. I know a lot of people think he got killed by government or some conspiracy stuff. Let me assure you, I think it was an accident. I've got a little story to tell you about John. We were out in Sydney, myself, my wife, John and Dominique, and John went to cross the road, and being from America, of course, looks over to his left rather than his right, takes a step out into traffic. I grab him by the shoulder, pull him back. A van goes past and the mirror clips his shoulder and his chin. So I really think he would have been badly injured, if not worse, that day. So I've seen it with my own eyes that he can make a mistake like that. And I think he went to England, he gave a lecture for Lawrence of Arabia, and then also a UFO group lecture. And the UFO lecture was so popular that they asked him to do another one later that night. So he came back to do that, and when he finished, he was walking home to the place he was staying, and he got hit on a pedestrian crossing by a drunk driver, and it was hit and run. And when I spoke to Dominique, as soon as we heard each other's voices, of course, we both broke down. But the thing she said to me was, when I hear your voice, I remember the good days we had. And they were preparing for his 77th birthday 2 weeks before. He died 2 weeks before. He's a good friend of mine. Okay. This is the first copy of the book. Bill, as soon as he got it hot off the press, came down to my place. You can see I'm pretty impressed there. I was a bit shocked, to be honest with you. They didn't want to use photos, and I suggested that they should, and I'm glad in the first edition it was colour photos, which enhances the look of the DNA stuff and that, and then later prints, it's in black and white. This is a book launch, 2005. We had about 550 people attended this event. We had a lot of speakers from overseas as well. The best thing about this is, as I said, I work in the security industry, and a lot of the people I work with aren't university graduates, neither am I, but they're not, you know, the brightest spark in the group, some of them, and they struggle with this a lot, especially the Middle Eastern guys. But when they read the back cover and they see that in the comments there, you know, shocking, controversial, all that, and then they see that there was the first case in the history that was DNA tested with biological evidence, it starts to get them thinking. And a lot of them will say to me, I was talking to a friend about this just now, a lot of them will say to me, I don't believe in this. And you know, a lot of them are from the Muslim faith and some Christian one, and they're hardcore. That's what they believe in, there's nothing else. And they'll say to me, I don't believe in that, Peter, but I believe you. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, because if you believe me, then you believe my story, then you must believe that this is really happening. But they have enough confidence and they know me well enough to know that I wouldn't lie to them and bull about this, and that's why they say, I believe you. This is just a lot of speculation has been thrown around about cloning, and what I saw were clones. These are just discussion groups on the internet, and believe me, there's a lot of them, and the ones that annoy me are the ones that haven't even read the book, haven't researched the case, haven't spoken to me, and they make a comment. They want the answer in 3 lines, 1.2 minutes long, can't be longer than that. And they get on their high horse and they start making comments that I hired prostitutes. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I dropped my wife off at work and I went home and I was sick as a dog, mind you. And I hired prostitutes to come to my house. And then I somehow made these hair samples that, you know, were different. So, there's been so many allegations and accusations. I'm not even going to give it air. I'm not going to give it time. But it's hurtful, especially when my kids have to hear it sometimes. But, you know, it's out there. People are discussing it. That's a good thing, I guess. Okay, this is 1996. I was at Homebush Bay. Having had experiences, I always carry binoculars and a camera in my car. Maybe 2 cameras. And we're at Homebush Bay when the Olympic Stadium was just starting to get built. And there was about 250 people in the park. And as we're standing there, we see, I don't know if you can see that actually. You don't see it, maybe. Just give me a sec. Okay, there. We see what looked like a helicopter in the distance. And that's not how it started. It was just a blob and it was probably up here. And it caught my attention, so I got the binoculars out, I'm looking, and I had the camera, and I just took a couple of photos, which these photos there. And as I was taking photos, people started looking. People started looking around, you know, what's he looking at? And everybody started actually pointing. I'm talking about 250 people, families and that, and I got numbers, phone numbers for some of them, and they were like, what is it, what is it? But what it did, it just slowly dropped like you can see, and it kept dropping, and you could judge it because of the power lines. It just kept dropping, kept dropping, kept dropping, and we're thinking this thing's going to hit, it's a helicopter, it's going to crash. And then all of a sudden, we hear, bang. And this thing shoots off. So I'm looking at it like that, and it shoots off to its right. At such speed, I'm surprised I caught it when I took the photo. But I heard the bang and I saw the flash and I actually banged, followed it and took a photo. I am so surprised I got that photo actually. But then I had someone from the media contact me and they reckon it was, it could have been, they were offering $10,000 for anyone who could have evidence of Project Mogul. Well, no, sorry, Aurora, which apparently can just drop from the sky and stop on a dime and then take off. And he said, oh, if it was video, you know, you could have got $10,000 for it and whatever. I'm not in it for the money, I'm in it to give people information. This is a picture taken by Kelly Cahill. She attended one of our conferences. And this is, I believe this is 1996 as well. But anyway, she's on a ferry heading to Manly. And she took 3 photographs. 2 of them don't show anything, but she could see this thing. That's why she took the photos. 2 of the photos don't show anything, and 1 shows that. And it was an arrowhead. It looked like a dead set arrowhead, like a triangular-shaped object. Okay, once again, 1996. I had, you know, people think if you've had more than 1 experience, you're lying or you're making it up. I think if you've had 1 experience, very likely you've had more. Now this is 1996, I'm in my bed and all of a sudden I get this feeling of dread, like something was going to happen. It was just all over my body. And as I'm lying there, I'm looking, my bed's on this side, so I'm looking over at the mirrored wardrobe there. And I see the wardrobe, the mirror sort of start to wobble in a way. It was like going hazy. And then all of a sudden I see a group of beings come out, and it was a whole group of these guys. Well, to me it looked like a whole group at first. As they approached my bed, I realised there was only 3 of them, but I thought it was a group because of a reflection in the mirror. So as they got closer, 1 was at the foot of the bed, 1 was to my left and 1 was to my right. As soon as they got in that position, I levitated off the bed, probably about 6 to 8 inches off the bed, and feet first started to go towards the mirror the way they came. And as I got to the mirror, my feet went through, it was like jumping through jelly. I don't know if any of you have done jelly wrestling. I haven't, but it just felt like a thick substance, but it had some sort of static electricity to it, and I could feel it on my skin. And my feet went through, and I could feel breaking through this thick energy or whatever it was. And as my body went through, I got to a point about my chest, and I looked and saw my reflection, my face in the mirror. And I could see that my face was in total awe. I was in total shock. Like, I was stunned at how stunned I was. Seriously. And as I went through the mirror, my head just, it was just static electricity, but it was like I was wearing, as if I had a helmet on or something. It was just consistent all over. And I've gone through, and I'm thinking, as I got to about here, I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to breathe? How am I going to breathe? And went through the mirror. I obviously didn't have problems breathing. But my next memory is I'm in my bed. And once again, if I had my eyes closed and I was asleep, I think, oh, you know, it's a dream. But once again, it was these guys. And I believe that they're the military. These are their military. These are their muscle. And the taller guys, big eyes, the slender ones, I think they're their scientists. My story with Bill's books appeared in 2 museums. One was at Emu Plains Art Gallery, and one was in Liverpool, and they appeared for about 3 months at each gallery, and it gave it a lot of exposure. That's, I believe, from the Emu Plains one, and they had like a whole setup. There was people there who made art, who made sculptures. It was all a UFO theme. I think every UFO enthusiast should have gone to that and checked it. You don't see UFO stuff in art galleries too often, so it was an opportunity. That's my children. They're grown up now, so I can show their faces. That's okay. That's where you start thinking, you go public, you don't have children, I can talk about anything, I don't care what anyone says. When it started affecting them at school and they started getting bullied because of what Dad believes in, not their belief system, mine, it really hurt me. It really hurt me, and you know, it hurt them as well. And that's when, you know, you wonder about hypocrisy and people believe in things that just because they're in the Bible or in a book that's been written thousands of years ago, blind faith, and they go, sorry if anyone's religious, I believe in God, but I believe as a creator, not someone who's waiting for us to judge us and kick us in the ass. But okay, this is thank you. This is some artwork that I commissioned someone to do some of it, and then there's another artist called Julian Finch. He did the one of John Mack, the caricature of John Mack. He's done some really good work. He's moved to England now. I designed all these, and I got an artist to make them. I hope nobody's offended by the Aboriginal and Ayers Rock taken off as a UFO. And then we had one also over the Harbour Bridge, Sydney Opera House Harbour Bridge with a UFO. It looked good. Okay, this is one of Australia's heavyweight UFC fighters. And as you can see, he's even wearing a UFO t-shirt. No, he's not. It says UFC. All right, 2010. I got a call from producers for a show, and they said to me, would you like to be involved in this show? We're doing a story. It's about Mary Rodwell and you know, the problems of her family, her research and this and that. And I said, no, not interested, thanks. And for over a period of about 6 weeks, I probably got 10 phone calls. And the last phone call I got was a producer who was desperate, and he basically said to me, if you believe in this topic and you want it to get credibility, you should tell your story, because everything that's been presented is falling apart. And what it was, Mary Rodwell took her son Chris, who's a vet, and he wanted to understand why his mum, you know, got into the field and why her family broke up over things like this. So he wanted to understand what was going on. Mary took him to her best evidence. Wherever she had good evidence, she took him, and apparently he didn't stand up to scrutiny. The They went to Canberra to a university, and they took on, she debated a professor. I don't know if any of you saw the show, but she had a debate with a professor there. The crowd was all, you know, it was all his students in the crowd. She was set up big time, but I believe there were a lot better evidence she could have used to get her point across. The evidence she used was very questionable, and it got torn to shreds, unfortunately. But anyway, they realised that the show wasn't going to make it, so they contacted me. They ended up coming to my house on a Saturday. We sat down, had a talk, told my story. They filmed it, walked out the door 6 hours later. The next day, it was a Sunday at 4:50 in the PM. I was heading to work. I was about to get out of my car and go into work, sign on at 5 o'clock. And the phone rings, and it was Mary Rodwell's son, Chris. And Chris said to me, "Peter, last night your story was so detailed, so interesting. Would you sit a lie detector test?" "Yes, I will." You organise, without even thinking, without hesitating, without even taking a breath. "Yes, I will." And I actually swore, to be honest with you. F and oath, I will. I've been wanting to do one for 20 years. I've been harassing Bill. I'm even willing to take the truth serum that the military use. And he was like, "Oh, sorry, we're filming this. Can I ask you the question? Can you repeat the answer without swearing?" I said, "Bloody oath I can." So, asked me the question again. I reply, "Yep, I'll do it," you know. And then they, you know, cut me off. And then during the show, I didn't know about this, but during the show, they cut back to Chris, and he's like, "Wow. You know, you put the question to this guy, and without hesitation, no, not even thinking about it, not even, oh, give me a couple of minutes." "Yep, I'll do it. Let's do it. When do you want to do it?" So the reason I did that, I thought polygraph is 100% accurate. If you lie, it'll catch you out. But I've since learned that you can beat it, you can do this thing. But I wasn't aware of that. The reason I jumped at the chance, I thought, yeah, I've always wanted to do it. This is going to confirm what I'm saying. So on a Wednesday, the following Wednesday, we have the crew comes back, Mary, her son Chris, with Gavin from the Australian Polygraph Association or something they're called, Australian Polygraph something. Anyway, I had already spoken to my wife, Bill, and Frank Wilkes. Anyone who doesn't know Frank Wilkes is a close friend of mine, a good UFO researcher, goes back a long, long way, naturopath, does firewalking, and has my best interests at heart, like Bill does. So I spoke to them, and they both said, "Don't do it. Don't do it." I already committed, and they said, "Don't do it. You'd be crazy if you do it." And so they came over on the night, and we had, I'll tell you what, if that debate was filmed, it would make such good television. I think they'd run it for years and years, honestly. Bill put up a really good argument. He had factual evidence that he showed them, and even the polygraph examiner took on board what Bill said, and actually came out to me. I was speaking to my wife from the back veranda. I said to her, "What do you think?" She goes, "Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not worth it." I was like, "Okay, I'm not doing it." Gavin walked out and said, "Pete, don't do it." He goes, "Mate, if you're worried about the money, them wasting money in that, that's television. That's not their money they're wasting, so don't feel bad about it. If you don't want to do it, don't." So I was like, "Thanks, you know." And he says, "By the way, I'm interested. Tell me what happened to you." So I spoke to him about my 1992 experience and slightly touched on the 1988 experience. So the 92, of course, is the DNA one. The other one was the one with the big, large eyes. He just listened to my story, didn't push me, didn't force me, didn't try to make me do it. And because he said, "Don't worry about it, don't do it," I just thought, this guy's not trying to sell it to me, you know. So I said, "You know what, Gavin, let's do it." And I'm claustrophobic, so when I have something strapped to me or I'm restrained, I don't like it, I stress. So I'm sitting down and Mr. Chalker walks in and, oh my goodness, wasn't a good reaction, let me tell you. He wasn't happy that he saw I was going to do it, and he had told the producers he'd do anything he could to stop me from doing it. But I don't know, I just had a feeling like make it or break it, you know. And the question I asked Chris was, if I take the test and I fail, what happens? He says, your case, this is straight out, your case will be destroyed. I go, if I pass? He goes, say you pass. Now to me, on the scale of things, well, as Bill put it, it's like choosing your own poison. It's like, yeah, I can't win either way, so why do the bloody thing in the first place? So I ended up, okay, I'm going to do this, and sat down, got strapped up, pretty nervous, of course. We do the test, everybody comes back in the room, sitting down, I didn't know what to expect. And then Gavin says to Mary and to Chris, I guess, before I get to that, there was an actual, one of Mary's clients who was an ex-SAS Navy guy who actually retrieved all the information about his story and beliefs under hypnosis. He sat the test. Now when he was going to sit the test, Chris, Mary's son, actually said on the show, which is recorded, I have no doubt Greg will pass. 100% he'll pass. Didn't make that comment about me. So Gavin says, oh, I suppose you want to know. And he says, Peter passed the test with flying colours. He goes, everything he's telling you is true. Now what I got upset about, they asked me questions about my 1988 experience, but not one question about the 1992 experience with the DNA. So I actually said to him, before he took all the equipment, I said, hang on a minute, aren't you going to ask me about my 1992 experience? And he said, Peter, if you're telling the truth about your 1988 experience, there's a big chance you're telling the truth. But I wanted it confirmed. I wanted the polygraph to ask me questions about that. But I know what I know anyway. I don't need a polygraph to tell me. But what upset me the most, I said, I had the opportunity now to throw it back at Chris, and I said, Chris, I'd like to know your opinion now. And Chris said, I believe Peter believes it, which to me was like moving the goalpost during the game. You know, I'm going to score a goal and you go and move them to the sideline. That's not right. He asked me to do the test. He obviously believed in it, and when I pass it, it didn't suit the agenda. So I was pretty disappointed with that. Okay, 2014, we got a call from Ancient Aliens, which I'm sure you're all aware of the show. Season 6, episode 19. I didn't know what the title of it would be, but then once it aired, it was Alien Breeders. Some good information. Try and catch up on it if you can. It's on the internet. Some really interesting cases in there about people fathering children. A male in particular fathers a young girl, has real emotional attachment to her, has seen her, has held. Really interesting. Maybe you should look that one up. And this is the emblem for the UFO Experience Support Association. And the reason we made it into a support group, and we had human and aliens sitting down and talking, is what we hope will happen in the future. Now, 2017, last year, I was sitting down watching TV. Now, in security, we do different shifts. Like I don't call it shift work, because I could be doing 6 o'clock in the morning one day, and then for a week I do night. So it's all over the place. I finished late one night, I went home, sat down, I'm watching TV, and all of a sudden, just out of the blue, and I got a little budgie at home, and I'm trying to train him, he's new, so I kept his cage door open just so he can fly out and fly in, but he's been a bit stubborn. But as I'm sitting there, I hear a bird. I can feel, you can hear the flapping of a bird, the wings, I could hear it, and I could even feel it, and it's behind me, and I'm thinking, that budgie's going to land on my shoulder, but I'm thinking, it's a damn big budgie though. This thing was big. So here I am sitting in my chair, and all of a sudden I feel and see this massive wing, giant wing, just come around me like this and wrap to about there. And then the way you see that, that's the back of my head, I'm just like looking at this thing and just freaked out, like what the hell is this? And the thing is, I could feel the wind I could hear it, everything. It was just, anyway. Then it just gets bigger and it wraps more and more around me, and this bird's getting bigger and bigger. And then as I look, it's over on my right. As I look, it's about this high. I'm sitting down, so it's about this much higher than me. And the outside of it, the shell, was like an eggshell. It was pure white. It had this thin layer. So where you see the black line, just imagine everywhere you see the outline, it's just white, but it looked like a solid white, not, you know, wavy and flimsy. The face was dark. I couldn't tell what sort of bird it was, but it was massive. It was like an eagle or an owl. Then it got to a point where both wings were in front of it like that. So it's here, and I'm looking at it here. It's about here now. And then I look at the tail, and it was just this mosaic, just like all these just like crystals and emeralds and jewels. And it was just like, it's like you're playing a computer game and something, you know, all your jewels crash and they crumble on the ground. You know, that trickling noise, that sound it makes. I'm looking at this thing, and it's, as I look at the tail, it starts to break apart from the tail, down from the bottom of the tail up towards the head. And as it's, I can actually hear and see these things bouncing off the ground, and it was making noise. It was like crystals and stuff just smashing everywhere. And then it disappeared. And I stood there, and I've got to tell you, I've had alien experiences where I've seen beings, and it hasn't scared me as much. This really irked me. I don't know why. I didn't know if it was evil. I didn't know what it was. I've never heard of anything like this in my life. And for about 20 seconds, complete quiet, I stand up and I'm like trying to look to see if there's any of these little jewels still left on the ground. And I'm really stressing. I'm thinking, what the hell is this? And then all of a sudden, from this end here, from this wall, right across to that wall, and I'll show it in the next slide a bit. Okay. Right across that wall, it's about, from this side to there, it's probably about 18 metres, maybe 16 metres. And all I heard was, oh, I couldn't even make it that loud, sorry. It was the loudest banging I could hear, and it was like, it was 10 bangs along the wall, all along that wall. Bang, 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 bang. And it happened so quick. It was, this is what it was like somebody standing like that and then just turning and hitting and then turning and hitting. So it was like rapid, bang, 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 bang. And I could tell when it was hitting the wall. And then right at the end, the last two, it hit the door, and you could hear the difference. It was like the door sounds different than the wall, just the way the door shook, and it's a different feel to it. And this thing must have gone out. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I picked up the phone and called my niece. And that's how concerned I was. And I actually said to her, I said, look, this has really freaked me out. I'll talk to you about it later, but if something happens to me through the night, I didn't do it to myself. Like, I was concerned. I thought anything can happen. So I just wanted family to know that if I was found dead the next day, or if something happened, that I didn't do it to myself, something else did. So, okay. There's a lot of peripheral stuff that happens. A lot of people don't talk about it. I certainly try to keep it all with the, you know, DNA stuff, the stuff that's been researched and that. But I've had so many experiences where there's been witnesses, there's been people in the house. I've got people that won't come to my house. There's a friend of ours, my nephew's girlfriend, will not use the bathroom at our house. She reckons every time she uses the bathroom in the house, something scares the daylights out of her. I don't know if she's overreacting because no one else has the experience in that, but it affects different people differently, I guess. But there's a lot more, if I had the time, there's a lot more I could talk about the peripheral stuff. There's one story I want to tell you because it really affected me. I had an experience where I was in a craft and I was lying back, paralysed, could not move. And it was on a solid, cold table, whatever you want to call it. And as I'm flying through or floating wherever what was happening, I could see through a window, like a porthole. And I could see that we were moving because I could see the sky and stars and things. And then we went to a building, and just imagine a building, white building with dark tinted windows. And this UFO hovered up against one of the windows, and then I levitated, go through the window, go through the tinted window, and when I entered the room, I was a foot down from the ceiling. As I'm looking down, I see a female in her bed. She had dark hair, just shoulder length, about 40 years old, attractive lady. As I kept lowering down, hovering down towards her and getting closer and closer to her, I could see terror in her face. I could see it in her eyes. It really, 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 it hurt me. I couldn't stop doing what was going to happen. She couldn't stop it. It wasn't something we were controlling, but still I felt guilty about it. And as I was about probably 4 or 5 inches away from her, like her face is there, my face is there, I seen tears run down her cheek, and it broke my heart. And I actually said to her, I said, I'm so, so sorry. I mouthed it to her. I'm so, so sorry. There was nothing I could do. And I feel so guilty about that. Years later, I was reading a book by an American author, and there's a story there that he relays with a female in her 40s, and she mentions having a guy come down from the ceiling hovering above her, and says that she cries, and then the guy mouths to her, or whispers to her, I'm so sorry, oh, I'm so, so sorry. And that really, I can't see that could be anything else. And I've wanted to meet that person. I wanted to try and make contact, but I don't want to do that in a way because I don't know how she'd deal with it. I didn't even speak to the author about it either. Sometimes things are best left alone. But, you know, I have experiences with aliens and they don't faze me, bring it on. But things like that, it really does get to me emotionally. And, you know, I hope you've heard my story tonight, and I appreciate you all for coming along and listening to what I have to say. And I thank you so much for being open-minded enough, and keep battling on, because we live in really interesting times, and there are things that are going to start happening very soon, and it's going to change a lot of people's opinions. Thank you so much.
More time later, but if there's any burning questions.
Peter,
Right.
last incident, I mean, you were spoken in detail, it's the first time I've heard about this. When you said that you were floating on top of it, anything happened? Like, do you know what I mean? Was it just you lying there?
Yeah, no, something definitely happened, yeah.
Out of your control?
Yeah, and that's why I said I'm so sorry to her, because, you know, it wasn't something she asked for.
It's just happening.
There was physical, it was, yeah.
I'm saying it wasn't you that you just...
No, it wasn't me. I didn't go knocking on a door. It's something took me there, and it was a forced thing. But, you know, I asked my ex, well, my wife, who's my ex now, I asked the question when I had my 1992 experience, and it took me like 3 weeks before I actually spoke to her, because I had these coughing fits for like 3 days. And I actually rang her and I said, look, something's happened to me. I don't want to talk about it now. I'm not ready, but I'm coughing, like really coughing through this as I'm talking. And she's like, oh, have a drink of water or something. And I go, I've done that. I said, look, when I'm ready, I'll talk to you about it. Took me 3 weeks. And I felt guilty, because I thought, how is she going to understand these 2 females, you know, something sexual like. And her response to it, well, I said to her, I said, how would you feel if, like, they weren't alien and they were human, but they were bought, you know, not of their own accord. Like, aliens forced the issue, and they came, but they were human. And she said, well, you're not a willing participant either. Like, you're made to do this. You don't do it for your free will. And she was that understanding with it that it really helped me to have a partner. But she had experiences as well. She had certain experiences, but the way she deals with it is, and her quote is, ignorance is bliss. So stick your head in the sand, stick your butt up, and don't worry about anything that happens. You don't see it, you don't worry about it, you know. Yeah, that's one experience that honestly, really, I would love to meet that lady and just give her a cuddle and apologise to her, but it wasn't of my own doing. You know, whatever happened, for whatever reason it happened.
Do you know the reason behind that? Or why that was? Do you have any understanding of why that happened?
Nah, couldn't tell you. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Do you think that maybe contacting that woman might help in the healing process if you've obviously felt you could feel what you were feeling when you were expressing that? I can really feel the emotion behind that. Do you think that maybe trying to contact her would help in the healing process that she might, and you're experiencing as well? Is my point?
Yeah, I think it'd be too confrontational for me, but I don't know from her point of view. But yeah, look, I'd obviously like to do that. Yeah, but I don't know what effect it'll have on that person. I don't want to go chasing someone up and I could have contacted the author, and I probably still can. But authors seem to be a bit protective too of the people they work. I hope they are, because I wouldn't want to give people's details out unless, give her my details and see if she'll contact me. But that's the only case I've ever come across reading a lot of books where someone repeated the words that I said. I've never come across that. I've never even heard other people talking about something different and saying, oh yeah, and the guy was on top and he said, I'm sorry. I've never heard that. So, the link there is very strong, and sometimes things are better left alone, I guess. I don't want to open wounds for her too. I don't know what happened to her, how she dealt with it, or if she even handled it well enough, But I feel sorry for people like that. They don't ask for this.
What do you mean you think things are going to happen soon? What do you mean? Do you think there's more happening now than what there was, or what do you
I think things have been happening for a long time. It's just now people are more willing to talk about it. I think it is escalating though. I think people are more open-minded now, and 20 years ago, we used to think, no, life doesn't exist anywhere. Now we've got the biggest scientists in the world saying the universe is full of life. Oh, but they don't come here. Why not? Personally, I've seen 3 different types of beings. That's my own experience, and I know other people have seen different types of beings, and just because they didn't see what I saw, I'm not going to say they're lying. But it is escalating, and I think we're coming to a point where pulling the wool over the public's eyes isn't going to work for too much longer. And why do we have to wait for governments to tell us the truth? I mean, we've got the French government, we've got Mexicans, we've got numerous governments, Belgium. They've released footage by Air Force chasing planes, radar tracking device, land radar, air radar, visual. And what I get upset about is, as soon as a pilot reports a credible sighting, some skeptic will turn around and say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Really? He's got 600 people's lives every second that they're in that plane, and you're telling me he can't identify if he saw something very unusual to what they're accustomed to? And we discredit people, police officers who have seen things, we've had ex-presidents of the United States who have seen things. But it seems to me that we're waiting for America to say, guess what, humans? We have aliens that have been visiting here, then what? They open themselves to a whole lot of litigation, because as we know, America is big on litigation. You'll have a lot of abductees who have been neglected, people have had experiences who have been torn apart, basically, their lives destroyed. They'll sue someone, to get something back. Or people like me, will we be quarantined? If tomorrow we wake up and it's on the news and they're hovering above major cities and that, what happens to people who've had experiences? They're not going to leave you alone and just go, let them go. I'll let them go and say hello. They're going to round people up, and you might get interrogated. That's hypothetically speaking. I'm just throwing it out there. What would happen, to people like me who have gone public, and I really don't care what the government thinks, but will they lock people up? Will they That's the thing. But it is building to something. And my experience was in 1992, and she communicated with me a couple of things, and I'll never talk about it, but I will tell you one thing. Time to them isn't how we perceive time. There's nothing near it. It's our concept of time is very limited, and it's completely different to them. So what we think is 20 years is a long time, to them could be 20 minutes. So, you know. Anyone else?
Like this last question.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I'm just curious, two questions. What do you think the alien agenda is? Do you have any sort of sense of that? And why do you think it was you?
Okay, alien agenda. I'll put it to you this way. If we want to save animals facing extinction, or not even facing extinction, we want to study a pride of lions. We get our scientists, you know, they go there, pick a group, dart them, knock them out, implant a chip in them or put a collar on them, check out their teeth, check out whatever, take a couple of samples, you know, DNA, biology, whatever samples, and they monitor them for a year or 2 or 10. They monitor the siblings, you know, or the family group. And I think aliens are doing the same thing to us. We think that, you know, when aliens come down, they're going to shake our hands, and I think they're that far more advanced than where we are at the moment, that they probably see us like we see chimpanzees and gorillas. We love them, we want to protect them, but we really can't communicate, can we? You know, we're on a different level, and I think that's what it is with them. They're very interested in us. I'm not going to say they're loving and caring, because some are and some aren't, but the experiences I've had, although they looked horrific, especially the short ones, I didn't feel a bad energy as in sinister. I just felt like they really genuinely cared. And what I failed to mention with Bill, I thought Bill might mention, when Bill was doing the research for the book, he spoke to my family in depth. My brother, he's the guy I had to slap to wake up, he actually said to Bill that night he saw me floating through the hallway with a number of beings around me, but he could not move to stop me. And he thought, my brother's not coming back, like someone's taking him. My neighbours who lived 2 doors down, only 2 years ago, both their brothers, one of them said to me that my story appeared on a show. It was some TV show, I don't recall. Anyway, he watched that and he called me. He said, you know, in '88 when that experience happened to you, he said, I walked out with my brother. Now, his brother wasn't living at home at the time, so they weren't like together talking. He said to me, I walked out to have a cigarette and there was a massive UFO hovering, a black one. He said it covered the 3 houses, which is his house, the neighbour's house and my house. And he says, mate, I'll never forget it. It was that big. A couple of months later, his brother came to me and he says, that experience you had, he goes, me and my brother were outside having a cigarette and we saw a UFO that covered 3 houses. It was that big. You couldn't see the stars, it was just pitch black. And why me? My mother, when Bill was researching the book again, he spoke to my mum, well, spoke to my family, and my mum came out with something that I have never, ever, ever heard her speak about. She said, oh yeah, when we were younger, we used to see flying plates, but all the older people told us they were Israeli spy planes. And that's the thing about Lebanon. People can say, oh, Peter saw a helicopter in Lebanon. It was no helicopter, because we used to have helicopters fly over and drop propaganda papers in all different colours. And as kids, we'd run around and pick them up and try and collect every colour. We were aware of a low-flying UFO helicopter looked like. So my mum says to Bill, when Peter was 22 days old, I was breastfeeding him at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, mind you, this is 1964 in Lebanon. The glass windows were shut, but the wooden louvered window shutters were open. And she said to him there was an alien standing in the window. He had white hair, milky white skin, wearing a black turtleneck. And she said, I'll tell you now, he was not perving at me. And she was adamant about that he was not perving at her, breastfeeding me. She said he was looking at Peter and never took his eyes off him. And she said, what woman breastfeeding wouldn't jump out of a bed and scream seeing a man or something at the window? But he was humanoid in every way, you know, normal humanoid, but milky white skin. Now, my uncle was a policeman at the time. She asked him, we have 2 ports, we have 2 cement factories, and a lot of ships come in and load up. She asked my uncle to check if there were any foreign ships in the area, like, you know, Swiss, American, Australia, whatever, blondes, you know, and there was no ships in the port at all. So what does a white, milky white man, milky white, similar to the milky white female I saw? And I was 22 days old, so what's the interest there, you know? Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Bill Chalker. Bill Chalker has investigated and researched UFOs in the North Coast and New England regions of New South Wales, while completing a degree in science at the University of New England at Armidale. He moved to Sydney in 1975 and became involved with the UFO Investigation Centre, which he still coordinates today following a successful implementation of a low prolific networking model. This approach allowed him to lead several successful research programs, including the first extensive and documented access to the Australian military UFO files during 1982 to 84. He also led detailed investigations of UFO landings with physical traces, historical pre-1947 cases, and alien abduction case studies. He has worked with numerous health professionals in these investigations and with a group of scientists who preferred a low profile. Bill's investigations yielded some breakthrough developments, such as the world's first forensic science DNA investigation, of what our topic is tonight, of biological material implicated in an alien abduction, Peter Khoury case. He was published extensively both in the UFO literature and mainstream publications. His books, The Oz Files, The Australian UFO Story, and Hair of the Alien were published in 1996 and 2005. He wrote columns and articles for the Ufologist magazine, and also the Australian chapter author for the new book UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry. So it's with my pleasure to introduce to you Bill Chalker.
Yeah, thank you, Joy, and thank you for Victoria UFO Action for having Peter and me to present what to me is one of the most interesting case investigations I've been involved with. And given that, I really need to personally thank Peter for allowing this investigation, because Peter he's in the best position to appreciate how intensive it was and how drawn out it was. But from a personal point of view and also from a scientific viewpoint, this investigation was really, to me, groundbreaking and quite extraordinary in its depth. And I find that most people, they think they have a perception of what the story is about. And I'll just ask, how many people here have actually read the book, Hair of the Alien? We've got a handful, okay. And how many people have read about the story on the internet? Few more, okay. I'm just trying to get a feel for how I gauge the talk and that kind of thing. It kind of shows that a lot of people kind of think they know the story, but really it's a very complex story. Now, in the next hour, I'm going to, in 2 parts, I'm going to try and give you a broad brush outline of the complexity of the case and where it's led, and some of the really interesting developments involved. So, now, as can be seen, Peter's case has a lot of interesting kind of elements that are common to a lot of alien abduction stories. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the individual cases. Peter's done that, and there really isn't enough time to do all that. You know, he's had things like the scoop marks, that kind of thing, that have been commonly reported, that kind of thing. but rather uniquely, he's had this situation where we've got a biological sample, a hair sample, and he's also passed the lie detector test. And just as an aside, Peter kind of conveyed my position. Now, my scepticism about lie detector tests comes from a scientific point of view, and that's why I had a fairly intensive discussion with Gavin, who I felt was a really nice guy and a good sort of representative of the polygraph profession. But my scepticism of polygraph testing comes purely from a scientific point of view, because it is not confirmed as a scientifically reliable tool. That's the reason why I was trying to talk Peter out. And I thought I was actually successful on the night, because I was actually there while they're doing the filming, and then of course I was kind of surprised when I walked in to find Peter all strapped up, ready to go, and I thought, oh, okay, I've done my bit to try and talk him out of it. But my objection to the lie detector test was purely on the basis of science and not being a reliable instrument, and I didn't want Peter to put his livelihood, his kind of reputation on the line in the hands of an unreliable piece of machinery. So just that bit of background. Now, this, just to give you a bit of background, I'm just going to highlight really what was the beginnings of perception in Australia of the alien abduction subject, and this really was July 1966, and it was the first reporting in Australian papers of the Betty and Barney Hill case, which was a very famous abduction case that was documented in this best-selling book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. Now, it was actually serialised by at least the Sun Herald newspaper in Sydney, and it may well have been serialised by one of the Melbourne papers, or the sister Melbourne paper as well. And I can remember cutting it out as a kid, as a teenager, and reading this really interesting story. So it was kind of early days for my interest, and it's interesting. Hindsight reveals a lot of interesting aspects to this subject, and one of them, which was very striking, is that in 1966, in the city suburb of Belfield, there was an 8-year-old girl who encountered alien greys in a very complex abduction situation. Now, her story is really quite significant. I haven't documented it in any detail yet, but I will. But decades later, as a mother, her own children experienced what appeared to be alien events at this historical house in Parramatta. Now, the interesting thing is that house, and you can see that's myself in the top hat, and Doug Moffat doing a historical in-costume reconstruction of an event that took place at that very house in 1868. Now, this year is 150 years since that event. Now, what this gentleman, Frederick William Birmingham, described was an airship that he encountered that landed in Parramatta Park in 1868. So I'm trying to work to get towards some sort of publication about that this year, in at least hopefully the 150th anniversary of that event. But what was really striking was to have this woman who was a child in 1966 in Belfield, and her own children, when she became a parent, her own children were having abduction-like events or strange entity-type events inside Frederick William Birmingham's house that still stands today as part of the historical trust. So this subject has so many complex kind of layers to it that one doesn't find out about it until you really get into very deep investigations. Now, jumping ahead, the watershed year for alien abduction investigations and research and public profiling was 1987, and I happened to be the first and only time that I've lectured to a MUFON group in America at Washington DC, and I was there representing Australia, lecturing about the Australian UFO scene. And as I said, it was a watershed moment for the alien abduction mystery. There were a panel of abductees for the first time. There were a group of about 12 people on stage who were all abductees, etc. Most of them were pretty nervous going public with this. And it was also the year that Communion by Whitley Strieber and Intruders by Bud Hopkins were on the bestseller list. So it was a very high profiling of the alien abduction subject. I was there for a different reason. apart from presenting the Australian UFO scene, I was also appearing on a panel about government and military secrecy on UFOs and government files and that kind of stuff. And that photograph shows Dr. Mark Rodiger, who was the successor to Dr. Alan Hynek, who led the Centre for UFO Studies. Beside him is Stanton Friedman, who's just recently retired from UFO research, Jenny Randalls and myself, and besides me, closest to the camera was Jenny Ziedman, who was the personal assistant of Dr. John J. Alan Hynek. So that was a really interesting time for me, you know, and I'd already, prior to going to the conference, I was corresponding with Whitley Strieber. And this is before Communion came out, because I'd heard on the grapevine that he was going to come out with this book, Communion. But we really had no idea what the impact was going to be, and it sold multi-million copies around the world, and there was a really tremendous worldwide response to this whole mystery. And Anne Strieber, his wife, received or processed something of the order of about 2 million letters from individual people around the world describing a broad range of experiences, and it just showed how complex the alien abduction subject appeared to be. Now, some of those letters were included in a book that Whitley and Anne Strieber put out called The Communion Letters. So that's a really interesting book to read, and in there's a case that Whitley Strieber regarded as probably the most important and most significant alien abduction case in terms of confirming something that Whitley Strieber had held back. And as you can see on the cover of Communion, there's the typical grey alien face, but one of the details they withheld was the fact that some of the grey aliens appeared to have fine wispy hair, and he deliberately withheld that element, and he was waiting to hear from these thousands of letters that were coming to them that detail. And it only came from one letter, and that one letter came from Australia, and Whitley passed that letter on to me, and I interviewed that person at great length, and I do mention it in my book, The Oz Files. What was interesting from an Australian point of view was that woman, in terms of trying to relate to some sort of artwork that was the most similar in terms of the appearance of the beings that she encountered, she drew the parallel to the famous Wandjina paintings. So that's something to be aware of. Now, that I'm fairly cautious about drawing those kind of parallels because I respect Aboriginal points of view. But when you start to talk to Aboriginal leaders, that kind of thing, they start to tell you about some pretty interesting and startling parallels. And so I'm not going to go into that area because it'll take up a lot of time. Now, Peter, you've heard give a pretty interesting and powerful talk. He's described a lot of his experiences, really just tapping the surface of a lot of his experiences, and having spent a lot of time with Peter, I realised just how complex this subject is and how interesting and unusual and I guess stressful and transformational a lot of these experiences can be. Now, he's described his experience in 1988. He's mentioned the two different beings seen. He's also described the friendship and involvement we had with Dr. John Mack, and John Mack was a really interesting guy, as Peter has highlighted. I spent a lot of time with John as well. He and I agreed to disagree about a lot of different elements, but you know, there was no doubt that John Mack brought a lot of kind of integrity to the subject, and his involvement being a Harvard University professor and that kind of thing, and his gift for communicating powerfully on this subject really drew a lot of people into the subject, a lot of people that were academically minded and that kind of stuff, a lot of interesting professional people as well. And so, you know, his passing was quite a big impact on all of us. This is John and myself and Dominique at, I think it was the workshop? Yeah, the workshop that Peter put on, the UFOESA Abduction workshop. Photograph of us there, and also John and Dominique and myself, Peter and Kelly Cahill were involved in a transpersonal conference there as well, and it really gave us an opportunity to go into the dynamics, and part of the dialogue that occurred at that is actually incorporated in the last chapter of my book, The Oz Files, if you want to get a feel for where John and Dominique were taking the subject. Now, the main focus of this talk is going to be the 92 experience, the hair sample and Peter's experience, and where the investigation went. So this is a photograph of Peter, and a copy of Peter's diary entry, and it's just basically describing having a strange experience with two females. This is something, as Peter has highlighted, he suppressed, and it took a few years before he even told me about it. And as he pointed out, it only came up in an accident and conversation. There were these two producers who were interested in doing a documentary, and Peter was a bit more forthcoming than usual, and the producers were lamenting the absence of physical evidence. He says, well, speaking of evidence, there's something I can show you. Now, that was the first time that I saw the samples and heard Peter's story about it. And so I documented that in my own journal and sort of bided my time, because at that point we had pretty limited possibilities as to what to do with it. But within a few years, and this would be around about 1997, 98, I started to make friends with a DNA professional. Now, at the time, when I first made the first report on it in 1999 in the International UFO Journal, or International UFO Reporter, a report that was about 16 pages long called Strange Evidence. And in the subsequent book, Hair of the Alien, I wasn't able to name this scientist, but he's since come out, and that's Dr. Horace Drew. He was the chief research scientist in the biochemistry section of the CSIRO. So no slouch in terms of this subject. So he brought a lot of professional and kudos and experience to the investigation. But because of professional restrictions, and it doesn't help one's reputation to be involved in such a controversial field, he wanted a low profile, but was prepared to assist in the investigation. Now, these are the two females that Peter reported. Now, it's inevitable that when people hear Peter's story, you kind of think people put it into dream fantasy, sexual fantasy, or whatever. To me, I tried to approach this from a completely open-minded point of view, and I said to Peter at the time, we're going to go into this in a real lot of detail, real deep forensic DNA investigations, and also leaving no stone unturned in terms of the investigation, the detail, the case, Peter's background, the whole thing. And I said to him, look, this might show up as completely prosaic, straightforward sample. If it does, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do to your wife and friends and stuff like that. So you need to be aware of it. Peter was extremely confident and wanted to have this examined in a thorough way. So off we went. Now, this is a slide. We got critiqued by Chris Rodwell, who was Mary Rodwell's son, the veterinarian, for having the slide in a slightly broken, patched up thing, but he sort of said, well, why have you got a sample in that? Well, the program didn't allow us the opportunity to explain why we hadn't. To us, it was more of a hazard to remove it from the slide than it was to sort of change it. So we wanted to keep it intact, because we only have one small sample there to play around with. The other part of the sample, no, Peter still seems to think it's a different sample, but we looked at it under a fairly high-powered microscope and videotaped it, and we were able to examine the two ends of it, and it seemed to us that they were two fragments of the same hair. And because one had detached and was further from the root, it had deteriorated a lot further and made it look like a different coloured hair sample. But fortunately for the investigation, even though it was a kind of a compromised sample and only a small sample, his presence of mind of putting it into a plastic bag, putting it into a folder and putting it into a filing cabinet was perfect for the investigation, and few people had handled it. And that was one of the things that we had to deal with, was contamination, the chain of custody, all that kind of stuff, which we did examine pretty thoroughly. So I'll kind of skip through the sort of minor course in human hair structure and all that kind of stuff, but the hair sample itself, and this is the microscope videoing of it. We're doing a traverse of the entire hair sample on video, so we had a record of it up close. it showed an optical transparency that seemed really on the edge of normal hair structure. It had this kind of typical kind of what was a continuous sort of medulla. That's the central shaft going up the hair sample, and that's kind of supportive of the idea that it could have been an Asian kind of mongoloid sample. This is kind of typical in these kind of hair samples, but the problem with this is that because it was optically transparent, don't worry about the green tinge, that was the lighting conditions we had under the microscope. So it was optically transparent and therefore to the human eye blonde if you had a lot of hair to look at. And we couldn't quite understand that dilemma. Why was it blonde and why was it apparently potentially Asian? We were expecting a Caucasian DNA when we did the work. And we also had remnants of the root as well, so we wanted to examine that as well when we had the opportunity. But first of all, we had to establish procedures, and with Horace Drew being a world-class leader in terms of DNA work, we had a really good person to work with who was supervising this work with a number of different people. We were looking for techniques, and really the techniques boiled around and were implemented due to the work of this one guy, Dr. Khoury. Now he happens to have he won the Nobel Prize in biochemistry for his part in the development of a process called polymerase chain reaction. All that is, very simply, is the opportunity to be able to take one small little bit of DNA and make millions of copies of it. Now that revolutionised biochemistry overnight, and therefore we're allowed, instead of having a lot of difficulty in terms of analysis of only being able to deal with one small particle, we were able to deal with multiple copies of those small particles. So it really revolutionised biochemistry overnight. Now the other unique aspect of Khoury was that he's the only Nobel Prize winner that I know of who also claims to have had an alien abduction experience. Now I spoke to him and interviewed him. He even invited me to join him on his balcony at his beach apartment and have a few beers and watch the boats go by. But I said to him, great, thanks, I'd love to come. But at the same time, I also wanted to go up to his cabin where he had this experience. And his experience was quite strange. If you want to know about it, look it up on the web, look for Khoury, and there's my interview with Khoury. It's also a chapter in the book Hair of the Alien. Now that's just a slide showing the breakdown of this multiplication. It's almost like Xerox, in a crude way, Xeroxing DNA. Instead of one copy of the DNA, you get millions of copies. It just keeps going exponentially. It's a great innovative procedure. This is part of some of the equipment itself, some of the equipment we were able to purchase with some of the limited funding that we received. And the first round of reporting, as I said, we concentrated on the shaft of the hair because we wanted to get that right first before we went on to the much riskier part, and that was to deal with the root of the hair because we'd only have one shot at that. And so we published a report in the International UFO Reporter, and I stressed to them that they had to, if they were going to publish this report, they had to publish the whole biochemical report, because it would make it obvious that a biochemical professional has written this report, because without it you wouldn't have the integrity of the data. This is the very first report that I wrote in 1999. This was what I call the phase 1 investigation of this case, and it concentrated on the shaft of the hair. And it goes into all the techniques, the details, and a lot of work in this, and eliminating contamination. We're testing controls like Peter's DNA, his wife's DNA, anybody who came remotely in contact or even was in the same room as the hair. We tested their DNA as well. So we wanted to have a lot of controls to compare against, and so we were interested in what differences there were. And we really weren't expecting it to be the result that we got, and that was a rare Asian mongoloid series of DNA sequences in there, and that caused us to be, we thought it was an interesting result and we should publish that, and which we did. And with the cover and everything, when that issue of the International UFO Reporter went to the MUFON conference, Dr. Mark Rodica told me that it was a bestseller. Practically the entire issue was devoted to this case. So, it was controversial. I'm just going to skip through. I don't expect you to read the report, obviously, but this was the report as it appeared, and it was also had the DNA supervising scientist. As you can see, this is the technical report that was attached to the IUR report. Now, normally they don't write it like a scientific paper to their journal, but in this case they made an exception. And the good thing about this is that it attracted some private funding which allowed us to go to phase 2. Now, phase 2 was the step that we knew we had to be pretty careful about because we're only going to get one shot at it, and that was to focus on the root. And we replicated the results on the shaft by going closer to the root but still sticking to the shaft. Got the same results again, so that's good scientific confirmation. And we got this DNA sequence, but what really confused the hell out of the scientists and myself was that we got a completely different set of DNA in the root. Now, in normal human samples like hair, blood, skin, whatever, when you do DNA, you get the same consistent DNA. There are some exceptions you can get, like a phenomenon called polymorphism, where you can get shifts in DNA, but these are very small shifts in DNA. These are quite large differences in DNA sequences between the DNA in the shaft and the DNA in the root. So what we appeared to have here was possible evidence supporting the idea of a hybrid type of person that had hybrid DNA. Now, the scientists at the time were really trying to figure out how to account for this result. Now that result and the whole range of results that we did were subsequently reported in the book Hair of the Alien, and so that gives you both the DNA results on the shaft and the DNA results on the root. This started, the basic differences were that the shaft itself had this rare Asian Mongoloid DNA, and the root had this rare Basque Gaelic DNA, and trying to account for that, but it inevitably led to a lot of interesting speculations, like we're dealing with the blonde there in Peter's experience. The second black and white drawing is of a facial reconstruction of the beauty of Lulong, which was one of the Taklamakan mummies from Western China, and this is a preserved mummy that a female that appeared to have sort of orange to blonde hair, and the argument was that there was a race of Caucasian-looking people in Western China a long time ago. I won't go into too much detail there because it was a lead that we chased because it was really interesting and that might account for the appearance of the woman that Peter saw, but there was really not enough information. And certainly the DNA of the Taklamakan mummies has been a bit more widely reported, but the Chinese government has been a bit reluctant to open up the sampling. But it's now been pretty much highlighted that it's part of possibly the complex migration through the old Silk Road, that kind of stuff that might have accounted for the complexity of DNA in the Taklamakan mummies. These are some of the images of the Taklamakan mummies. Now, so as I said, the phase 2 work was basically reported in Hair of the Alien, the book, and it kind of gave us a bit of an insight. And one of the other interesting things was the, I'll get to this in a moment, the CCR5 deletion factor. That's the nuclear DNA, and we had only limited amount of nuclear DNA to deal with, so it only gave us a limited confirmation of this possible result, which I'll get to in a moment. Now this is Horace Drew and myself. He was one of the authors of Understanding DNA, one of the main textbooks for PhD students, that kind of thing. So he was widely regarded within the DNA biochemistry community as an excellent research scientist. So we had a really good person that be on our side in terms of this investigation. So we had some by that stage, we had this really interesting collection of DNA evidence. We had the shaft, which was the Mongoloid Asian DNA. We had the Basque Gaelic DNA in the root, and we had the suggestion of this. Where are we here? Just trying to draw a comparison here. Horace drew this graph and showed the two different DNA readouts that we got, and it's this. It points to one of the DNA samples, or the DNA points there that seem to be present in a very limited Asian community, and we were trying to figure out, at the time, the DNA database didn't allow us to find out who that the sample was coming from, but eventually, because we had contacts within the Chinese and Asian biochemistry community, we were able to eventually find out that the source of that sample appeared to be people from a small isolated ethnic community, and that was the people that often referred to as the Lahu, or in northern Thailand, Lisu, and they were a minority group. Now, in southern China and Yunnan province, there is an autonomous state or province of Yunnan, and the capital of that is Langchang, and which is right on the Langchang River, which is the Mekong River in Thailand. And the Lahu mainly are spread out in the northern Thailand area, in Myanmar, and also in southern China, in Yunnan province. And so with this support that we had with some limited funding, we were able to mount an expedition to go into those areas to get samples and to also examine the belief systems and the anthropological work that was going on with the Lahu, because we were really intrigued by why would their DNA be turning up in a sample of hair in a very bizarre alien abduction experience occurring in Sydney with Peter Khoury. So it was a really intriguing mystery in what appeared to be a hybrid sample as well. So we were really quite intrigued by this. That's just a readout, and this is the earlier result, the other result of this constellation of unusual DNA results, the CCR5 deletion factor. Now, CCR5 deletion factor is, if you've got the deleted CCR5 gene, you're incredibly lucky, because basically you're going to be fairly impervious to things like AIDS, smallpox, all that kind of stuff. Now, having that deleted gene factor is a fairly interesting property to have in a person doing this kind of experiment. We're a little bit uncertain about that result because the nuclear DNA was not very good, but we were able to get a partial result that suggested that was happening there. We examined a number of different possibilities, the so-called Tuatha De Danann, because of the Gaelic connection. The Tuatha De Danann, interesting people. They were the first people that sort of led to the kind of finding or founding of modern Ireland. They didn't arrive in conventional ships. They appeared to have skyships that came in clouds and landed on the mountains in Ireland. Led to some really interesting myths. If you want to find out about Tuatha De Danann, look at the legends of Ireland. Now, just to close this segment, I'd just like to make a point about the importance of looking at these claims scientifically and where we can get biological evidence. There are a lot of books and claims out there on abductees and people making contact with aliens and all that kind of stuff, but really, essentially, without any evidence, and biological evidence, DNA evidence, they're basically just interesting stories coming from sometimes fairly compelling people. But in order, because these stories are so strange and the claims so extraordinary, it really does need some sort of scientific evidence. And when you get books like New Human by Mary Rodwell and The Alien Gene by Moira McGee, and you see those books and they don't appear to have any sort of detailed scientific DNA reporting, you've got to wonder, because really the availability of DNA techniques out there are becoming more and more readily available to the general public, and these sorts of claims can be examined in a detailed genetic DNA way. So I'm here kind of trying to trumpet the significance of doing this kind of work. And the whole Hair of the Alien thing was really a test case, or like a template for people to examine. But the disappointment I have is that no one has really attempted to do that. And it's been close to more than a decade since the Hair of the Aliens come out, and still the claims of alien abduction and modified DNA and all that kind of stuff, and hybrid children and the new humans, they've become so widespread in the UFO community, and yet no one is there documenting it in a scientific way. And our case still seems to be the one and only case that confirms this in a hard scientific way. Another phase of this investigation that I find really interesting, but it's a huge project, and it's only had very limited kind of inroads. And it's what I call the alien DNA paradigm, and it's really a test of our hypothesis. And basically, let me just get you to the next slide. Here we go. And really what I'm talking about here is looking at evidence for alien genetic intelligent intervention. Now, I'm not talking intelligent design, you know, I'm not getting into the creationist kind of biblical kind of battles that go on. But a lot of biochemists, including Horace and others, when you talk to them privately and all the rest of it, there are a lot of things in the biochemistry world that just don't make sense. And they're not going to come out and report it because there's simply not enough hard scientific data to back it up. But when you start to look at some of these genetic anomalies, you've got to wonder whether it's evidence of somebody or something tinkering around with our DNA. And guess what, folks? That's what we're doing a lot in the last decade or two, since we've had a lot of these biochemical and genetic revolutions. We're tinkering around with our own DNA, we're tinkering around with animal DNA, we're tinkering around with the whole biological kingdom, you know, making rabbits that glow in the dark and all sorts of strange genetic properties. You know, it's almost sort of Frankenstein in nature in many respects, but it's what we think is cutting edge. But maybe there's a different civilization out there that's been doing that kind of stuff routinely for hundreds, thousands of years maybe, and maybe we're the result or part of it. That's the kind of area that I'm trying to look at. And the key markers for this kind of paradigm or hypothesis is really to find out whether they're trying to find areas that have all these common factors, that is, locations with high strangeness or breakthrough activities with UFOs, light phenomena, alien abduction stories, and that kind of stuff. Cultures that feature sky being claims, diverse UFO phenomena in those kind of indigenous cultures, that kind of thing. Possible unusual DNA markers within these cultures or present selectively or genetically in human DNA, and locations of regions which bring together each of these factors, like UFO haunted locations, alien mediated culture, and DNA aspects. So that's a pretty tall order, and yet there are cultures out there that kind of demonstrate these unusual connections. Now back to the unusual genetics, the hybrid genetics that we're reporting at. Off we went to northern Thailand and southern China to examine this particular genetic marker. And I don't expect you to read that, but basically this is phase 3 of the investigation. The alien DNA paradigm is the phase 4, much broader. But here specifically, with the aid of what we got as a result in Peter Khoury's hair sample, was this unusual clue. And this took us in an expedition into, in October 2006, as I said, to Thailand and China. And I'd done a lot of research prior to that, trying to get background information on DNA of some of these ethnic minorities, particularly Lahu, fairly limited, but it seemed to confirm that there was some connection here. And there a photograph with Jim Goodman, who's a pretty interesting guy, but he's kind of the leading expert on documenting and photographing all these minority ethnic tribes in northern Thailand and southern China and Myanmar. He's published a lot of interesting books and photographic records of these ethnic tribes over a period of about 20 years. Now, that photograph kind of shows us having a fairly, well, it was the end of a long hot night, and we had exchanged a few drinks and stuff like that, so it was an interesting exercise, but he did help us with very precise locations where to find the lahu, and off we went. Now, there was a major textbook called Merit and the Millennium. This is about 800 pages long, that is devoted entirely to the religious customs of the lahu, and in that you'll see references to the shamans, or the equivalents to the lahu shamans, seeing objects flying across the sun with these sunspots, or the strange dark objects going across the sun, strange light phenomena, even down to the detail of receiving this stone tablet with writing from the sky gods. So it kind of was starting to satisfy a few of the elements that we were interested in terms of this potential alien DNA paradigm. The next photograph shows us in northern Thailand. Now, the problem with northern Thailand was that the lahu people there were really wanting us to come back during the non-farming period, and they were going to make some of the lahu, because their culture deems personal hair, skin, all that kind of stuff as almost totemic or very important ritualistically, and that they'd lose some of themselves literally and psychologically as well. They would only allow a volunteer to present that sample, and that had to be done in a very religious or elaborate religious ceremony. We can see that this thing was escalating, and we were going to have to come back months later to be involved in a big religious ceremony and sacrificing cattle and whatever, and waiting to finally get a sample under controlled conditions. So we thought, let's abandon that, let's go into China and go to the autonomous community in Yunnan at Langchang. So we did that. Pretty wild conditions going up, earthquake-prone roads and all that kind of stuff to the capital. There's a lot of interesting documents there that suggest that there's a lot of strange light phenomena, UFO phenomena. Actually, while we're in that area, about 6 weeks after we left, there was an intense UFO wave that took place. You know, wish we were there, but even the local communist cadre or leaders were reporting sightings of objects hovering over cottages and buildings in the Langchang area. So it kind of gave us information that suggested that maybe there is some validity in pursuing this alien DNA paradigm hypothesis. And this chap here, Marjan, he wrote well, he's basically a dissident Chinese writer who roamed around China more or less on foot a lot of the time, spoke out against a lot of the communist regime. In his book Red Dust, which became a bestseller in the West and a forbidden text in China, but eventually did get published in China, he describes an encounter with a light ball that actually got him out of a very sticky situation with Chinese authorities. Basically, he was under house arrest and they're going to ship him back to Beijing. And where he had been arrested was actually lahu territory. And he was actually going through this territory. He was worried about, at the time, this is back in 1986, being speared or attacked by lahu, who was still a little bit tribal in protecting their areas. Luckily, they weren't that warlike or tribal-like when I was there. So, but the Marjan was actually at the Sydney Writers' Festival by coincidence, and I attended that, and his Chinese translator actually allowed us to do an interview with him, because I was trying to establish whether it was some sort of allegory of his own disconnection with China, this being lost and saved by this ball of light that led him out of custody, and he followed this light ball for miles and miles, and it got him away from the Chinese authorities. But he said it was a true story, and that he followed this light and it led to his freedom, basically. So it was a very unusual story. Now, the whole Langchang, the Mekong, as I said earlier, the Langchang River in China is actually the Mekong River in Thailand, so it's the same river. And one of the other very unusual light phenomena on the Mekong in northern China, and also celebrated in Laos, is what's called the Naga Light Festival. Now, I went there with some local guides, and we were really interested to know what this Naga Light Festival was all about, because every year, almost like clockwork, there are these balls of light that come out of the Mekong, and thousands of people go there, and increasingly every year more and more Westerners are going. Now the thing is, you can easily document the fact that this goes back hundreds of years. You can see the balls of light drawings on the temple walls that go back over 100 years. And it's not only each October during the Buddhist Lent period that these balls of light are seen, because if it was only the one day of the year that these were seen, you'd start to think it's a tourist event being set up. And in fact, the film there that you see, there's a poster there for what's called the Mekong Full Moon Party that puts forward the idea that the Buddhist priests are kind of faking this ball of light to strengthen the Buddhist belief systems there. And the Naga lights are supposed to be the light that comes out of the Naga dragon that inhabits the Mekong. But anyway, we were there, and we saw the Naga lights, and I came away with that, thoroughly intrigued by the Naga lights, but unable to explain it away as a tourist hoax. It just, for example, you'd see the balls of light coming out. We'd go into night zoom. I think you can see one of the night shots there, and there's nothing on the water there. Now, in order to get a ball of light to come straight out of the fast-moving Mekong, you kind of expect it to be going off in all different directions because of the speed of the current and all that kind of stuff, but these lights were just rising out every time, straight up. And you never had to really worry about when they were going to come out, because there were literally thousands and thousands of people up and down the river, and when these lights came out of the water, there was this huge roar you could hear for miles up and down the river, and you were spotting busily. I was busily getting these things on video as best as I could. So there do seem to be these areas that seem to have unusual light phenomena, and it seems in some interesting ways connecting with the Lahu. So maybe there is some support, and I'd love to be able to document this in other cultures, and we've been getting some information along those lines. Now, I'll just very quickly go through some of the more obvious similarities to Peter's case. There's the famous Travis Walton case. In his experience back in 1975, in Arizona, he encountered two types of beings, the greys, or what appear to be grey-like beings, and also these blue-eyed, blonde, Nordic type women, the same sort of thing that Peter encountered. You got the very famous Antonio Villas-Boas case from 1957, again a blonde-haired woman. But one detail that was kind of deemed to be a bit too sensitive and personal was not reported at the time, but very interesting in terms of the results that came out of Peter's hair sample. And that was that what was not disclosed was that while she was blonde-haired, she had very fiery orange-red pubic hair, and this red hair under her armpits as well. So what we were dealing with there, we don't know. But was that some sort of linkage to the Gaelic culture or Irish culture? Who knows? But it made for an interesting kind of point there in terms of the resonance with Peter's case. Another case that occurred around about the same time as the Antonio Villas-Boas case, one of the earlier documented cases of alien abduction, was the case of a Rhodesian or Zimbabwean shaman, or they call them Sangomas there, chap by the name of Credo Mutwa. Now, I've interviewed him, and I devote a whole chapter to Credo Mutwa, the Zulu shaman, and he is full of alien stories. And Peter described the experience of when he says he's claustrophobic, and I've verified this quite a few times with Peter, that yes, he is. But when he encountered the blonde woman, he bit on what he thought was the nipple area. It's pretty sensitive, I know, for all you ladies, but when he ingested whatever it was, it had this very severe reaction. And the way he described it, it's almost like an anaphylactic shock, if you an acute allergic reaction. Now this is pretty bizarre stuff, but Credo Mutbar says that the alien creatures that he encountered were called the Metadani, and one of the taboo customs in the induction of a Zimbabwean or Zulu shaman was to ingest the flesh of the Metadani, and that is the skin of this so-called alien. When he draws this is the Metadani, according to Credo Mutbar, the little figure down in the bottom there. Looks like a grey. He painted this back in 1983. He's a world-renowned and highly regarded shaman and painter and sculptor in South African culture, and a healer as well. So this report of him having this ingestion of the flesh of the Metadani, it's not something that you'd commonly encounter in Western culture, but when he said he did that elaborate ceremony so he could be ushered into the secrets of the Sangoma or shamans in African culture, he had a severe anaphylactic shock. And the parallels to Peter's experience were, for me personally, very striking. So that's just another obscure connection that comes up in these sorts of investigations. These are pictures of the necklace. He's a sculptor as well, and there's an actual dish-shaped object and also a reproduction that he created of the female that he encountered. Now, I'll leave you to read the extracts in the book about Credo Mutbar's encounter. Now, it was very horrific and unpleasant, the encounter, so I'll give you a fair warning there. It was not exactly a very friendly experience there. But there are other encounters, other cultures, Chinese culture that I've extensively investigated, where opportunities have been missed, and this is the point I'm trying to make here. There's the techniques and the ability to be able to examine this stuff in a much more coherent way, and I know science is not the only pathway to do all this, but what it does do is give you some certainty about what you might be dealing with, or gives you a greater opportunity to try and understand it. When you've got like this Meng Zhao Gao case at Harbin in 1994, the aliens he allegedly mated with a female alien, but they applied some sort of what appeared to be like a band-aid effect. Now, I said to the primary investigator of that case, Professor Chan Gongfu, who I met in Harbin, or not in Harbin, but in Dalian in northern China, this sort of case, if you come across it again, please keep the sample. You know, they had the sample, this so-called thing that was put over a wound that occurred during the encounter with Meng Zhao Gao with these aliens. If we'd had that and did DNA work on it, we might have got some real interesting results and deeper understanding of what's going on here. The same goes for another case here, Kalgong in 1999. Allegedly, this guy was taken. He was an actual herbal doctor in Beijing who had this abduction experience, claims that he was somehow taken on board and asked to somehow conduct traditional Chinese healing that seemed to fail on this Chinese girl that was inside the UFO with him. This was a really traumatic case, and I got to meet the Kalgong in Beijing while I was there. And again, in this case, there could have been really interesting physical evidence, because they actually tracked down this girl and found that she was a little not quite full grasp of her mental faculties. And they used about 200 university students to track down this young woman, and they were able to check her out, and she had these strange markings on her back, and this is the abductee, Kalgong, and the young girl. But she has no recollection of it, but she apparently had disappeared for a day during this period and had these physical marks that were unexplained. So if it had been examined in a genetic forensic DNA kind of way, we might have had a lot more interesting information to deal with in that case. So I was really trying to push the Chinese researchers in this direction as well. And we've applied these genetic techniques. I kept pushing this to people like David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins and others who were putting forward a lot of different ideas about what might be going on in alien abduction areas, that they were coming across potential situations which could easily have been examined by DNA genetic techniques, but most of these opportunities were never taken up. But here locally we were looking at a number of different cases. There was a kind of case that had very similar parallels to Peter's case up there on the mid-north coast of New South Wales. But in this particular case, it fell down in terms of the chain of evidence, chain of custody, where the sample was dropped and we couldn't be certain whether it was the same sample that he claimed he had in this exotic abduction experience. As it turned out, the DNA we did on this confirmed that it was the same DNA as one of his daughters, and so we believe that it was the daughter's hair that was dropped on the floor that was picked up, all that kind of stuff. But at least we did the work to figure it out. We got pulled in by Robert Bigelow's group in the early days. It's now called BAS, but it was, back in that day it was called NIDS, or the National Institute for Discovery Science, to examine a Californian case that became quite controversial, and that was called the alien claw case. And the local researchers were saying this was really proof positive of an alien, an actual claw from an alien. I don't know too many aliens that had claws, but anyway, we looked at that and we were able to do DNA work on that, and what we found that we got really exotic DNA results to begin with, but it's important in science to repeat your results, and we did that. And when we repeated the results, we got a completely different set of results. We thought, what the hell's going on here? And we did it again, another set of different results. And what it turned out to be, and actually pioneered a bit of a revision of techniques in doing DNA on it, was that this turned out to be a local snail, or a desiccated snail, what was left of a snail, and this guy took it to be physical evidence for an alien that kept appearing in his house and called it the alien claw case, but we confirmed it as a local snail. And there's something about snails where the exudation from snails causes havoc with DNA, and you've got to have certain primers to combine with DNA testing to stabilise the DNA that you get from snails. Since then, they've been able to do more interesting and verifiable and consistent DNA work. And speaking earlier on about the Betty and Barney Hill case, we got involved with doing the DNA on a pink stain that appeared on Betty Hill's dress during her famous abduction case. And this was always a bit of a mystery, and she kept that dress that she wore during the alien abduction episode in her closet, wrapped in plastic, and a researcher, Phyllis Buddinger, did some basic chemistry, or some detailed chemistry really, and it showed, this is Phyllis Buddinger with Betty Hill, and the other shot is from the film, the UFO incident, that recreates in a very accurate way the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. Check it out on the internet, I think you can actually see it. One of the better alien abduction films out there. Phyllis Buddinger's work was important because it highlighted the presence potentially of proteins in this pink stain on the dress, and so we felt it was worthwhile to try and do some detailed DNA work. We could ultimately explain the pink stain, and it turned out to be spider's blood. And it was a local species from the New Hampshire district, so perhaps sometime during the night, during this experience, Betty came up against the spider, poor spider got squashed, ate a spider's blood on a dress, and that's what we verified it as spider's blood. So the DNA techniques can be a very powerful technique, but what it does is it can give you certainty where right now there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's why I tend to try and encourage people like Mary Rodwell and others that are plugging all this new human stuff, the hybrid children stuff, that really you need hard evidence for that because it's such an extraordinary claim. Now, just to close this off, I'll touch lightly on some of the psychic aspects of Peter Khoury's case. And I did a detailed lecture, delivered it 3 times actually, it turned out to be pretty popular, UFOs, alien abductions and contact, the parapsychological connection. And in there I reported very briefly some of the experiences that had occurred. In Peter Khoury's case, there was kind of like apparitions or ghosts or multiple footsteps back in 1988 that led up to the 88 episode. Possible telepathy aspects in the 1992 case where he's getting this mental kind of thoughts from the 2 women, or that this hasn't happened right, he's not doing the right thing. Apparitional type episodes. There's a reproduction from a diary entry that Peter made of a strange light creature that he encountered in the house. And there's one very strange case that involved one of the investigators, in fact Horace Drew, and his father, who encountered, Horace had to go in an emergency dash back to the United States because his father was near death. And during when he got there, he was told to prepare for his father's death, imminent death, and he found that when he got there that his health had been restored, and he was trying to understand what was going on. And it turned out that during probably the lowest period of his illness in hospital, his father was visited by a strange woman and touched him and seemed to give him like an energy burst and said her name was Sorana. And as it turned out, remember I mentioned the connection with the rare Bar scaly DNA in Peter Khoury's hair sample? Sorana, actually when you look it up in the Gaelic, Sorana is one of the goddesses of the Tuatha De Danann, one of the founders of Chinese, not Chinese, of Irish culture. There's been several invasions in prehistory Ireland, and the more interesting one from our point of view was the invasion that came with the Tuatha De Danann, where they came in their flying ships and landed on the mountains rather than come by sea. Very interesting legends, the Tuatha De Danann. But here was, and Horace was kind of shocked by that, to have his father near death, having an encounter with this woman Sorana, and Sorana was one of the legendary leaders of the Tuatha De Danann. So very curious. And again, Peter's experience with this bird-like figure last year. Now, when Peter told me that, I was kind of struck by the description, because I immediately thought, gee, deja vu here, because I remember reading a book back in 1975 by a psychic researcher, Jeffrey Mislove, and it reproduced a photograph from a Polish physical medium session in Poland in 1919. And here, the traditional kind of seance that they would have, these physical mediums would generally be in the dark, and they took a flash or a photo during the seance when this bird-like creature appeared to hover over the medium, and that's the photograph that shows this medium, and the similarities to Peter's experience are quite striking. And when Peter told me about this experience and I spoke to him, I sort of said, have you heard about a case out of Poland in 1919? His reaction was, what the hell are you talking about? So I explained it to him and showed him the picture, and the description by the psychic researchers of the day shows some striking similarities to Peter's experience. The trouble is that this Polish physical medium, was very like many other physical mediums of the day. They're often caught out doing hoaxing, all that kind of stuff, and so we're not sure whether this is a legitimate photograph or not, but certainly the scientists that were present during this session believed that something physical was flapping around the room. There was also the noise on the walls, similar to Peter's experience. So we've got a pretty unusual coincidental comparison between something that occurred in Poland in 1919 and something that occurred in Sydney last year. So I don't know what it means, but it's certainly an interesting connection. So that's basically pretty much what I want to cover. just encourage you to perhaps acquire the book here of the Alien. It's easily attainable via Amazon, even through Amazon Australia. Get it as a print-on-demand type book, so support UFO research and open to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. The scientific evidence. Question? We've got about 5 minutes for questions about.
Bill, so were you able to do any of the DNA testing of the people that hold people either in Thailand or China?
I'm going to be circumspect there. We did get some confirmation there, but I'm not really. It's a bit of a complex situation that I don't want to go into any detail about because it could get me into trouble with certain people. But yes, we did do some sampling and we did do some work, and it seemed to confirm this DNA connection. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Getting DNA samples in China is very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Any more questions regarding Bill's talk?
Gee,
Yeah.
no question.
Bill, originally when you did the research, that was some years ago, has there been any advances in DNA genetic technology that would perhaps bring further light to what's already been discovered?
Yes, actually, I kind of get into this because got a nice little endorsement from a Dr. Tyler Coachon. I think I've got it here somewhere where he makes a comment on that exact point. If I can find it. Basically, what he's saying that he kind of applauded what we did at the time because we did a really good job with the resources that we had at the time, and the developments in DNA research and testing and all that is exponential. We could have done perhaps a much more detailed job. Trouble is now DNA techniques are so sensitive that it's almost down to the molecule level, and when you start to get down to that level, the impact of contamination becomes very real and very problematic, and so you have to be extremely careful about contamination. And so that when I've referred to the concept of chain of custody, that kind of stuff, you have to know the handling of it and all the rest of it. And this is one of the things I talked to David Jacobs about. He allegedly had a whole fridge full of biological samples, but been sitting in his fridge for years and years. And I sort of said, "Why don't you test them?" And he asked whether we could test them. I said, "I think it's better if you test them, particularly because there were a lot of issues with chain of custody." Now, I couldn't get a detailed enough story out of David to support the worth of doing these testing, because we needed really detailed information about was this from that particular case. Because we couldn't get that clear information, I just encouraged David to use local DNA facilities, local genetic places, and we gave him some information about who to contact in respect to that, but I don't think he's done any work on that.
Any more questions? Yeah, one more.
Not too sure if this is a question per se, but when you look at people like Dr. David Clarke in the UK, and it goes back into stuff like back in time when people missing time and they blame fairies and stuff like that. With Peter's case, who's to say that hasn't happened a lot more times, and it's been blamed on succubus and all this type of stuff? Sorry, it's not a question, I know, but
yeah, well,
that type of stuff, you know,
the parallels,
succubus sort of thing,
yeah. I'm not sure whether you're making the point that's suggesting that what we're seeing today is a modern fairy culture retold or whatever, but the parallels are very striking. We came across a Scandinavian story of the milk maidens, these figures that would woo young men walking in forests and stuff like this. And there was one very explicit case that actually grabbed the guy and brought the guy to her breast, and he became enchanted and lost time and all that kind of stuff. You know, interesting parallel to Peter's case. You know, and there's in an obscure fairy tale context in Scandinavia. So Jacques Vallée wrote a book called Passport to Magania that discusses that whole theme, the parallel between fairy lore and folklore and modern day contact and abduction stories. I don't think that we're talking about fairy tales and folklore when you can verify it with DNA testing. There's something physically real going on, and maybe it's the lens of the culture and the era that we're seeing these things through. And maybe the alien explanation is wrong. It could be something else entirely, but it's certainly something pretty unusual and something that really ought to be looked at in a scientific way, but also in a detailed cultural way, a multiple disciplinary way as well.
It seems people accept the universe and succubus as, oh, that's the explanation. But when it comes to aliens, dismiss.
Well, I think it's becoming more and more open now in many respects. There's a lot of people, interesting people that have been looking at the alien subject that have a lot of scientific credentials and that kind of stuff, but they're still doing it possibly a lot in a confidential way, but some people are coming out publicly and doing it.
Peter, you've had a lot of very traumatic experiences and you seem like a very stable, sensible person. How do you manage to maintain...
He's not.
How do you manage to maintain your mental health given all the traumas that you've suffered?
Look, I've not only had alien experiences that are been, you can say traumatic and that. I work in the security industry, and I've been involved in some incidents where I've had a shotgun to my head for like 7 minutes in an 8-minute robbery where there were 60 people in the place. No one got hurt, and I handled it really well. But everyone asks me, how did you do it? How did you keep your nerve? If I can handle the alien experience, I think I can handle any shotgun to my head, as long as I don't pull the trigger. But I don't let it get to me. I'm not scared by it. I don't go looking for it. I'm not there meditating and trying to call them over all the time. But if it happens, and I just learn from it and grow from it, and I talk about it because I want other people to relate. The reason I went public originally was to let people out there who have had the similar experiences, who were too scared to talk about it to their families, to know that other people experience it. And the word seemed to get across really clearly, and people just come out of the woodworks. But I think my strength is that, I don't let it take over my life. If you came into my house now, you'd walk in and you go into any room, you would not even think I'm into aliens. But don't walk in my office. But that's my office. I shut the door. Nobody would know I even believe in aliens. But you walk in my office and you'll get the shock of your life. Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions? Someone here? Yes. We'll go to you.
Okay. Junk DNA.
Mm-hmm.
We've been Homo sapiens taken. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think the term junk is a bit of a misnomer. I think they're gradually understanding that it's more probably, current thinking is probably it's more appropriately called regulatory DNA, that it has a much more important function, and it's not junk, very significant, but they don't sufficiently understand it. But I think that's the future pathways of biochemistry, to understand the importance of all our DNA rather than just the main sequences that we normally used to deal with. The junk DNA turns out to be extremely important.
I'll say this to you, I think a lot of the abduction experiences, it doesn't relate to the individual, it relates to the DNA and the library in their DNA. It's all about ancestry and the records that are in our DNA, and that's what I think they're interested in more than me as an individual. I think it's the history that's within me.
Yeah, we've actually shown, DNA is a really interesting molecule, and Horace has got a lot to say about the nature and the behaviour of DNA, and it's being used more and more as a potential carrier of information and all that kind of stuff. So it's an incredibly fascinating molecule, and I kind of, in the book I quote right at the back here, where are we?
By the way, this copy's for sale if anyone's interested. We just dug it up.
Just let me hold it for a little bit longer.
It's an autographed copy too, so.
Yeah. There's a, where are we now? I'll find it eventually. An interesting little...
Meanwhile, back at the ranch.
Yeah. Just go on to talk as you were for a moment.
There was movement at the station.
Oh yeah, here we go. There's one guy who's a bit of a dissident, and I've heard him interviewed very many times in terms of the biochemistry community, and this is Simon Conway Morris. Now he's regarded as a world authority in evolutionary paleobiology. In other words, the evolutionary pathways that life forms have taken through our history on Earth. And that's not just human life, that's the whole biological kingdom. Now he reached a conclusion very similar to what I was driving at, but he has a great deal more authority, and there's a very deep, complex book called Life's Solution, and subtitled Inevitable Humans in a Lonely Universe. And he says, using our best evidence for life, our own planet Earth, that's really the only example we've got, to argue against the prevailing scientific evolutionary paradigm, Simon Conway Morris argues that the ubiquity of evolutionary convergence, not only does life have an extraordinary propensity for navigating multiple pathways to precise biological conclusions, but that it repeatedly reprises the same evolutionary solution, mediated powerfully by the weirdest molecule in the universe, namely DNA. In short, Morris contends that on suitable planets out there, the genetic tape of life will play out in more inevitable humans. In other words, he says that humans are kind of like a peak in the pathway somehow. But, contends Morris, the rarity of Earth-like planets means that we are most likely living in a lonely universe. Others argue, however, that life is everywhere, driven by a life principle that favours the spread of life through the universe. Now, I wrote that back in 2005, and Conway's book had come out a couple of years earlier, and we've seen in the last decade the number of planets being found around other star systems exponentially increasing every single year. Now, it used to be there was no certainty that there were planets going around other stars. Now it's a given almost. Now the whole scientific evolution of thought is getting closer and closer to the idea that life out there is going to be very common, and we're getting to that point where we maybe very soon see strong evidence that life like us is out there as well. So that's the pathway that Conway Morris was arguing for. He's done it pretty consistently, and he's a highly regarded scientist, so interesting viewpoint, and I like the fact that it converged with what I was thinking about as well.
Sorry, so just now that you've said that, I just wanted to sort of give you guys a piece of information before I ask my question to Peter. I actually did a study about a year ago where I worked out that there were 25 Goldilocks planetary candidates within 8 light years of Earth. So that's 25 potentially habitable planets within, that's actually reachable by human beings. My question is for Peter. Peter, have you undergone any hypnotic regression therapy or anything like that?
Yeah, I have. Professor John Mack conducted a session with me, and Bill with Rob Tilley conducted one. But look, I tend to concentrate more on my conscious recall. That's the strength of my memory in my case. I actually don't comment much on the hypnotherapy stuff. Yeah. And even with Professor Mack, when he did it, the thing that impressed me there was I was stressed, and then he noted, and he actually commented about the fact that relating to my 88 experience, how I was stressed, and then all of a sudden when I see the tall, big-eyed guys, how quickly I calmed down, and it reflected that during that session.
Yeah.
And he just, actually the comment he made to a psychiatrist that was with him was, you can't fake that. You can't be sweating 1 second and stressing and then bang, it just switch it off. So I don't know, I look at hypnotherapy as a tool that we can use, but not a source of answers.
Yeah, thank you.
But there are a lot of researchers that are entirely relying on hypnotic testimony as the answer to it all. And I think that's probably a pretty uncertain and unsafe pathway to go. I think it's got to be a multidisciplinary approach to it, not rely just on one approach. You know? DNA is not the answer to it either, but I think it's a significant player.
Peter, you've had many experiences, obviously. As you have, can you feel an experience coming on?
Yeah, sometimes I dread it.
Yeah.
As I said, I don't go looking for it.
No.
But yeah, there are times when I feel it with every bone in my body that it is going to happen, and the paralysis kicks in.
Yeah.
And I know that's the start of it. And you know, it's happened while my partner's lying right next to me in bed.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to happen every time. I don't want to, every time it wants it to. Sometimes I'm just not ready, don't need it, and I'll try to do my best to touch my partner, like even with my hand, to make a movement to get attention,
Yeah.
And I find that sometimes it works and sometimes it's just they're full control. I can't do anything about it.
Yeah. So when you have your experiences, do you actually go somewhere, or are you still physically there?
Both. I've been taken.
Yeah.
Like my 88 experience, I was taken somewhere.
Yeah.
The 92, I was in the house.
Yeah.
I was always in the house. The one I described with the female hovering above her and that was taken somewhere.
That was on a...
Yeah. So a mix of being there, and I think sometimes it's come in, do what they got to do, and leave, and then sometimes they need to take you away to do further stuff.
The same.
Well, I've seen 3 different types of beings.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're all working together or what, but I know that 2 are, and that's the communion type creatures, the little guys.
With you?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's telepathic communication,
Yeah.
and it's, as I said, it's not voices I hear in my head or anything. It's more a knowing.
Yeah.
It's more a feeling.
Yeah.
It's like I know what you're thinking right now, and
Okay,
yeah.
lovely. Thank you.
That's all right. We'll come to you next.
Just wanted to ask, given that you now know the DNA, that you've made the analysis, which indicates that that it's actually of a human origin. So what sense do you now make of the blonde woman, given that? Does that make sense?
I thought that question might come up. Yeah. The problem is that really all the DNA work has done is it's just given us a bit of an outline as to what's potentially going on, and one could speculate endlessly about who these people were. Were they humans?
I believe the blonde. I believe that from day one, and that's why I mentioned to the panel of experts I spoke to that she didn't have a belly button, and I had no clue about DNA. I did not know that clones don't have belly buttons, they're not born like us, and from day one I always said she didn't have a belly button and they're made for a reason, and the question was, what do you mean made for a reason? And I said, they're made to breed. Yeah, and hence the Ancient Aliens episode, which was called Alien Breeders. Yeah. So there was a question from a lady just there, back. Yeah, there.
Have you ever considered being scanned to see if you have any implants, considering you've had multiple?
You know what? We're so limited in the time that we have to talk, and I actually had an implant fall out of my head. When I said I had something stuck into my head there, It was a time I went with my partner and went to see Frank Wilkes, and he actually was the first person to have a look and see the donut shaped, you know, with the big hole in it. There was not long after that I was sitting at home and my wife was sitting next to me, and we didn't have kids at the time. I'm sitting there and I kept just scratching at it, and I kept telling her, there's a wire poking me, it's pricking me, like it's felt like steel wool, you know, when you get steel wool and pricks you. I'm saying to her, there's a wire there, and she has a look and she's gone, oh my God, I can see a wire like just poking out. So I kept picking at it, and you wouldn't believe it, like here I am collecting a hair sample, I do the best to keep evidence. This thing fell and we both saw it, and it was probably like a rice grain. It hit the coffee table. I wish it stayed there, but it didn't. It bounced and landed on the carpet, and we had shaggy carpet. So I ran in the bedroom, got the little, you know, those little vacuum cleaners. I put some tissue on the tip, on the front of it, and tried to suck up whatever was in that carpet to try and retrieve it. And unfortunately I couldn't, and I kick myself every day for that. You know, that would have been another bit of evidence, and it would have been powerful evidence, I guess. But my son had, my missus cut his fingernails one night, and he was so stressed. She said, oh, I'll do your other hand the next day. And she was, you know, cutting his fingernails. She could see if there's any marks on him. Went to bed, got up the next day, and right in this part of his hand, he had an implant. And he had bleeding nose. There was blood all over the, I don't like talking about my kids, so like, but yeah, he had blood on the pillow, blood on the mattress. I've had my daughter wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and run out to me and just put her arms around me and start crying. And make comments like, Dad, I just want to be a kid. I want him to leave me alone. I just want to be a child. And I said, what's wrong, sweetheart? You know, and she's like, Dad, they want me to do this puzzle. It's like a gun with a bullet, but it's not a gun or a bullet. But I don't want to do it, Dad. Please, just tell them to leave me alone. And that's where I struggle with it. They can do whatever they want to me. I'm big enough, tough enough, and ugly enough to deal with it. But when it comes to my children, they're 19 and 22 now. You know, they're. But yeah, that's where you start to, you know, be worried as a parent. But there's definitely, yeah, I could easily get my son x-rayed now, but I don't want to put him through that, you know. And he's got his own life to live. I don't want him living in the shadow of mine and, you know, oh, my dad, I've had experience of it. It's up to him. If he wants to go public with it one day, I don't force the issue, you know. I know there's a lot of people out there who like to say that kids are star kids and, you know, half alien and all that, and I think that's putting a lot of pressure on your child, and I would never do that. But when they're old enough, they can go public with it if they want.
Bill, I was just wondering if you heard of Charles Hall and his experiences in Nevada with his sort of egg-shaped craft.
Yeah.
He reckons some of the stitching was very sort of...
it's out of my league.
Out of your league.
Yeah, no. I've read a lot of the books and, yeah.
Have you heard of the, and the other question is, have you heard of the Atacama
yep.
being... What do you make of that?
Yeah, Dr. Gary Nolan just published a peer-reviewed genetic study of the Atacama mummy. This is a little 6-inch unusual-looking figure that was found in Chile, was it? Chile, yep. And was kind of presented by Dr. Stephen Greer in his documentary Sirius as evidence of an alien. And even at that point, there was no hard evidence to prove that it was alien. And the most recent genetic study has confirmed that it appears to be human. But it's a human with very extreme mutations. And at the time when Dr. Gary Nolan was looking at this for Stephen Greer, Horace Drew, the DNA scientist working with me and myself, we were actually corresponding with Gary Nolan to give him some suggestions. And we kind of felt that perhaps Stephen Greer was kind of jumping on what was deemed at that point to be unknown sequences, about 10%, as evidence of aliens, but it was not evidence of aliens, it was evidence of unknowns at that point. And now Dr. Nolan thinks that they're kind of explainable as a whole range of exotic human-related mutations. Actually, Horace is potentially arguing that maybe that's not quite the case, but scientists argue about things all the time, but they want certainty of documentation before they go into print with it as well. So I'm waiting to see how that debate plays out, but to present it as an alien at the time I didn't think was appropriate. And actually we were actually presented with that sample a good few years prior to Stephen Greer dealing with it, and we didn't take it up because we didn't feel there was an appropriate enough chain of custody, that too many people had handled the sample, and we really weren't prepared to, we didn't have the resources, in fact, to deal with it at that point. But I was really pleased that Gary Nolan looked at it because he has such access to huge facilities in his laboratories in California. So it's great to see that work. Sorry about that.
Any more questions? Yes.
Just while you're walking over to him, I recently realised that from way back I was a probably ancient alien theorist, and I believe we were seated here, and I believe we get a little kick up the butt every now and then, enhancing our DNA or giving us a push along, which could be called evolution. And when we test DNA and it comes across human or close to human, why wouldn't it be if we were made in their own image? So.
Question to both of you. Are you aware of any government or military or otherwise covert interest in your case? Have you been approached on any level by anyone in that kind of position?
I've had one incident, and it happened in Auburn in Sydney. When you say interest, do you mean have they come and asked us questions or?
Correct. Well, Bill mentioned Bigelow, for instance, but
yeah,
you know, there are possibly people watching what's going on here. Have they approached you?
Not government officials as such, and if they did, they didn't do it in a government capacity. They might do it as a research thing, but.
Yeah, I was approached. I was approached by I won't name him, a member of anybody familiar here with the term the Aviary? This is a group of players within the US intelligence community. This guy was a member of the CIA, but when he approached me, he was working in private practice as a, well, I won't actually describe what he's doing because that'd be a bit too specific, but he was a sort of a part-time intelligence player, and he was very interested in the book, but wanted to find out more, but basically I declined to buy into it because I just felt that the whole situation there with that group was so uncertain and full of, it was basically like getting into a wall of, or a whole hall of mirrors, you know, you didn't know who you're dealing with kind of stuff, but so I didn't want to play the game. And so, yeah, that's possibly one of the few approaches we've had from people that have been part of this intelligence structure in the United States that have been interested in UFOs and paranormal topics. But he could well have been asking it purely out of personal interest. Yeah. Anyway, that's a fairly circumspect answer.
Hey guys, thanks for a great presentation. It's fantastic. I just want to ask Peter, I know Whitney and Anne used to talk about a connection between kind of the paranormal and spiritual realms in connection with the UFO case. With you, Peter, could you just elaborate a little bit more on your kind of paranormal experiences that Bill touched on? You know, have you had them all your life? Have you felt like it's been contributed to ET kind of contact, or you know, how has that kind of developed for you?
Yeah, I don't know if you call it intuition or But 1992, 3 months before I had my experience with the two females, it was March 92. My oldest brother's wife was murdered, and I didn't know anything about it at the time, and I was driving from home to pick up my missus from the station, and we had a cleaning contract to go to, and as I was driving there, I just had this feeling that something was really, really wrong, and then I felt like something, this is honestly, it was like a physical thing, like something reached through my mouth deep into my stomach and just ripped my stomach apart. It was just the most evil pain, and it was dark, it was evil. And I felt it, and I crunched over in the car, and I was like, oh my God, something really bad. I knew I wasn't sick, but I knew that something really bad had happened, and picked up my wife from the station. She got in the car, she was like, oh my God, are you okay? I said, I don't know, but something's bad, something's happened. 10 minutes later, we're on our way to Wetherill Park, and we get a phone call, and it was my niece, you know, screaming on the phone, Auntie Salam's been murdered, and I just knew it. I knew that something was wrong. But I've had a lot of things where, yeah, you know, you could say connected, paranormal stuff, so many things. I don't know, did I mention to you the thing with the neighbours? We're at neighbours. Just quickly. It was 1996, March 1996. My son was 5 months old. The neighbour next door, they had a baby, and he was 5 months younger than my son Stephen. And we were at their house because they just brought him home. And the neighbour went to check on her son. My wife, my neighbour, my best mate, who's a teacher, and his girlfriend were out in their backyard. As we're standing there, we look up into the sky, and we just see the sky, like the Bonanza show where the map starts to burn, but this was more like an eye. The sky tore open, and it was like an eye opening, and we could see landscape, and it was like you're flying over in a plane, and you could see the landscape and the different greens and shades of yellows and greens in the grass. And then we noticed the fence, and it was an old wooden type fence, and it ran down the side of the property, and it kicked back to where there was a gate, and there was a massive tree. I mean, it was the biggest giant tree I've ever seen. And there was, this gate was broken, and as we're looking at this, we're all saying, can you see that? Can you see the tree? Can you see the fence? Can you see the broken gate? And we three of us are like confirming what we're seeing, but my wife and my neighbour are going, what are you guys looking at? And it was right there. It was like you could not miss it. And as we followed it, we tracked it, we saw 3 white horses come into view. And as soon as the horses came into view, it seemed that they noticed us, because the 3 of them looked towards us. One of them reared up and just made this massive noise and took off running. And I sort of tried to track where it was running, because I wanted to see what the homestead was like, because there was a little walkway. It wasn't car driven. It was either people walking that track or horses. It wasn't a car track. And as I looked, I went back to the gate under the tree, and I noticed the grass started to get shorter and shorter, and as it did, and you know, I had a slide on my, it wasn't exactly what I saw, but it was very similar. And then it just dropped to a cliff about, I'd say 200-300 metre drop to the widest sand you've ever seen. I never seen sand that colour, as far as the eye could see, and massive waves just crashing onto this beach and actually hitting the side of this cliff, and as far as the eye could see. And I thought, why did I come and look at this? Why didn't I track the horses and see where they went and have a look at the homestead? You know, you can tell by what people are wearing what era it could have been, but I don't know if it was another place, another dimension, or somewhere else on this planet. I don't know. But some years later, there was a gentleman who's interested in doing a documentary about me, and filmed at my house for 3 months, and went overseas to Lebanon and interviewed people there and so on. And he came back and bought this a picture for me, a framed picture, and it was of 3 horses, and one of the horses is rearing up, you know, and he said to me, I couldn't help it, I had to buy it for you because it reminded me of what you saw. But look, there's a lot of things. I could write probably 10 books and not tell you everything. But I try and stick with the main strong stuff. and hope that that gets the message across. But there's a lot of stuff, yeah.
Bill, I've got a question for you. Would, if there was an alien, for want of a better word, could their DNA be exactly the same as ours? Could we miss something?
Well, that's kind of the contention I make, and
Yeah.
Simon Conway Lewis sort of kind of supports that idea that maybe DNA is ubiquitous out there in the universe, and that but we've got to find certain evidence for that, you know, stuff that people will accept. And right now, all we've got is experiences that people like Peter have, very limited samples. That's why I'd like
about 100.
Yeah, about 100. 1,000 would be great. People like Peter and samples like that, duplicating the results, but essentially we've only got Peter's result and a few others that are nowhere near as interesting and complete.
I'll tell you what, I was rubbing my hands in anticipation when Bill called me and said, guess what, there's a guy who has a story similar to yours and has a hair sample. And there was another guy a few years before, Christian Fedora. He came and saw me at my work one day, and we sat down during my break, and I couldn't give him the time I would have liked because I was at work. But he claimed to have seen a blonde female, Asian female, very, very similar experience to mine, and talks about a hair. But he dropped the hair, he didn't keep it. He dropped it, went back to find it and couldn't find it. Now if we can get, the reason I with Bill and I are doing this, and what Bill's aim is to get people educated enough to that, okay, it is bizarre, it's freaky, you might lose your track of thought, but if you ever have an experience like that, please check your bed. Like as those two producers that were at my house once said, if this is really happening, there's got to be some physical evidence left behind. It's like a sexual assault case. There would be pubic hair or some sort of DNA left behind. So if anybody that happens to them, if you see something, grab it, put it in a bag, and it can be tested. And if it comes out normal, then so be it. But then you might hit that jackpot, and it just builds on what we got already.
Yep.
Any more questions? Peter, I've got a question.
Yep.
Have you had contact with the two females again?
Have I? Yeah, but probably prior to that experience.
Yeah, it's a complicated story, that one.
Yeah. As I said, I like to stick with my conscious recall, and there seems to be indication that, yeah, but my conscious recall is the 1992 case, and I just stick with that. Okay. Yeah.
If you want to read about the detail of that, that's covered in a whole chapter in the book. Too complicated to describe here.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Question? Or anyone want to share any of their experiences?
Yeah, I'd love to hear some stories from you people.
No pressure.
Anyone? Yeah, okay.
Probably a silly story. Ouija board. I was playing the Ouija board one night with my friend. We're out in the court outside my house, and we said, are there any UFOs out there tonight? And I went to see UFO. And we said, where do we look? And the cup slid off, as in like over there, which was to the right of my house. And we said, okay, well, how long do we wait? And I went to 1 goodbye. We didn't know if they went like an hour or 1 minute. But about 60 seconds later, something green just appeared over our house, and it was like pins and needles through us, and we grabbed each other. Shit! Oh! It just felt, it was so scary, but it was crazy, and then it just moved over the house.
How big was it?
It was pretty big, but not huge. It was like a green sort of ball, and it just went over the house. And I saw it. Was it a demon through the Ouija board, or could I contact aliens through a Ouija board? I googled it. I couldn't find
Well, look,
anything.
there's a famous case in America with some soldiers, that 7 of them actually, that went AWOL.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, some of you might be aware of that case, and they went AWOL because of what happened with the Ouija board, and they actually went to Israel, and it was a major case. They got brought back, but they were never charged for going AWOL. I think the government wanted to sort of quieten them down rather than upset them.
Okay.
Yeah. Look into that
Yeah,
case.
I
It's an
will, I
interesting
will.
one.
It was connected with Gulf breeze as well.
So,
It was connected with Gulf breeze.
Gulf breeze, okay.
Yeah, I think you look up the Gulf breeze 7.
Yeah, Gulf breeze 7, that's it.
On a Google search, and you'll find out about it.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thank you.
But it's a weird story.
Yeah.
Sharon,
Isn't my story weird?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
anyone else would like to share or have a question? Okay.
Speaking about the light phenomena that you were looking at overseas, have you actually looked into like the Min lights and bullring around Australia?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh boy, do we have a story to tell you?
Which one are you talking about?
Brewarrina.
Oh God.
Remember when we went into that small town and one road and...
Yeah.
We had
well,
lights.
the trouble with this story that Peter's alluding to is that it was pretty weird.
It was weird.
We were at the back of Burke.
Doing an investigation,
Doing
mind
an
you.
investigation of a UFO crash story out the back of Burke that was conveyed to us by some Aborigines. And as part of the investigation, we went through Brewarrina, but we were interested. I had a really obscure clipping about an event that seemed to involve like a being that came down to the roof and grabbed hold of an Aboriginal guy and lifted him up almost through the roof of the house and left a claw mark type of thing on the back. And it was such a bizarre...
And his partner witnessed it.
Yeah, his partner witnessed it. And when we were in Burke, the key Aboriginal informant that we had of this crash case pointed out to us that the widow of the witness of that particular story was passing by, but he told us that under Aboriginal custom we couldn't...
She was mourning.
She was mourning, so we couldn't talk to him, but we did go out to the location of the event, which was at a very obscure place called Wilmaringal. And we went
Very bizarre.
We went to the place where this event occurred, and local people didn't know about it, but it was kind of a very strange experience. And actually, when you go there and talk to Aboriginals and you get their confidence and you have the assistance of respected Aboriginal regional leaders, it's like opening a can of worms. There are just so many stories that come out. But it was the trip back.
Well, the town was 6 houses.
Yeah, it was a very... When we drove into that area, it was originally designed as a kind of almost an Aboriginal Eden community, an experiment.
Yeah.
But it kind of was somewhat of a failed experiment, I think. We drive in there with a lot of car wrecks and everything, and we step out of the car and how many dozens of dogs were coming up to us, and we're thinking we better get back in the car. But anyway, it turned out to be a pretty friendly place, and but it was the trip.
Mind you, there was one road in.
Yeah, but multiple roads back, and we don't know. We had a lot of trouble with that.
And there was a light behind us.
Oh, well, that's a difficult thing.
Well, Bill reckons it was a truck, but I just think the truck doesn't go. But anyway, it might.
Yeah.
But
it was kind of like a lost highway experience.
Seriously, like we entered that town via one road, and there were specific markers that dead sheep, for example.
Yeah.
So you could not miss them. We drove out of that town. We were completely on a different road. It wasn't the road we came in on. But it's only one road in and one road out. So as we were leaving, we're like expecting to see dead sheep, the gate we had to come through, and it was a completely different. And we were questioning the whole way, are we
lost?
Did we enter through another road, or? But it was just bizarre, and that was a strange one actually.
Yeah. Now I'm not saying that we had an experience or something, but it was interesting. It was strange.
It was
Very
strange. Yeah.
Maybe.
Anyway, Peter's, as you can tell, Peter's very interesting company in an investigation.
Maybe we have time for one more. Just one more. Anyone? Here's your chance. No? Yep, okay, one more.
Going with a hard one here. The big question in ufology today is what's behind this. Now, half the community seems to think it's ETH, that is little guys coming from 8 light years away or whatever. The other half seem to think increasingly that it's some complex consciousness-related phenomena that we just don't understand. Can I ask what your conclusions as to where you are today? Where do you sit?
Look, Professor John Mack was of the thought that it's a transpersonal thing, and he was really big about that we're at a stage now where things are happening and we're being shown things to grow as a human race. And he wasn't too much into the physical evidence of things, and that's why him and Bill sort of had different viewpoints. I'm like Bill, I probably like to stick to the physical evidence stuff, but I'm sure the other things is interesting, but...
Yeah. That's why I miss John, because even though John and I disagreed on some approaches, you could have a really very agreeable, deep intellectual discussion with Dr. John Mack. He was a really incredible guy to talk to, and really was an interesting explorer in this area. And it would be great to still have him contributing to the area, but not to be. But he was kind of, yeah, I don't know whether I should quote from the tribute I wrote for his group. He was kind of, I think, almost shamanising the whole alien abduction subject. That's what I put to John as well. He kind of agreed with that. But I think you can have both. I don't see why you can't have the potential of aliens that are actually out there that are employing techniques that to us seem paranormal and full of strange consciousness experiences. To me, we're early explorers in this area, and maybe UFOs could be a pathway into exploring this a lot more deeply.
What people should also take note with Professor John Mack, he came out to Australia, went to Arnhem Land, and spoke to a lot of Aboriginal elders there, and the stories he was told were fascinating. It got to a point where John was getting harassed. He went to South Africa and spoke regarding the Virginia case with the little school kids and all that. Got footage, interviews, everything, and then there was, I won't name which TV channel, but they started to harass him really hard, wanting the information, and then they wanted to go and do it themselves, but obviously they didn't have the credentials John Mack had as a psychiatrist and to interview these people and do it properly. And he was concerned to the point where Dominique, his partner, suggested that he copy every bit of information, every bit of research that John did over the years and store it at my house. I mean, it's trusted me that much that they were willing to do that. And he was very concerned about it. And I think he had every right to be too, because they were threatening to steal his information and so on. But John went around the world and spoke to different people, you know, young and old, and Khoury Matwa was one of them. He did some fantastic research, and but he was into the transpersonal side of it more so.
He was a psychiatrist, so
yeah, well,
entitled to look at that area. That's great.
Great, thanks very much, Bill and Peter. Could we all just give them a round of applause? I'd like to introduce, bring Ben back up to close the event.
Okay, wow. I think we can all say we had a really, really great evening tonight, and thanks very much to our two guest speakers for coming down, and I think you've well and truly expanded all our minds. So on behalf of everybody here, I'd love to thank you for that. I'd also like to thank a few people who helped bring this together. So I'd like to thank Lana and Irene and Andrew, the whole VUFOA team, who really have put in a lot of effort to bring this day together for everybody. So look, thanks for coming along. Thanks to Steve filming down the back as well, and also to the RSL. So we'll be having more events in the future, and certainly perhaps this year as well. And so thanks for supporting us, and come back again next time.
Thank you. Thanks, mate. Pleasure.